It is said that long ago, a god built a wall to test humanity. This magical wall split the entire continent in two, plunging the world into utter chaos. From then on, people began to fight against nightmarish monsters, creatures that seemed to crawl out of hell. Countless settlements were wiped off the map by these relentless beasts. They possessed insane power, and the world had already been turned upside down. Yet afterward, more people began to disappear within the wall for no reason. The tears of those destined to suffer the pain of losing loved ones soaked every corner of the continent. Just as the world was about to collapse, a man people called a hero appeared out of nowhere. The fearless Carlos Arthur Ingram, who never flinched even when facing the darkness that was devouring the world. He saved the continent with his godlike abilities and then directly established his own empire, Kaleda. And so the war began. Hundreds of years later, all of this was happening in the peaceful Kaleda Empire. The sudden appearance of the Countess spelled big trouble for the Emperor. Rustica Janus, a first-class knight of the Empire, held the title of Genius Sword Demon. Our war with the wall has been going on for centuries, but the monsters are endless, and people continue to disappear. During the last raid, the Knight Order was short-staffed and ended up sacrificing the soldiers' children. It turned out that such tactics no longer worked for the Imperial Squad. So Rustica believed that the best course of action for the Kaleda Empire was to cross the wall. In that instant, the girl broke free from the shackles of the dark forces that had kept her silent. The Empire's top knight didn't realize how arrogant she sounded spouting such bullshit. Rustica pissed off the great Emperor, and now she is caught in his thunderous wrath. For she lost everything: her insane swordsmanship and magic skills, her honor, and the knightly title she had fought tooth and nail for. The support of all the fans who adored her, everything she had, was now a thing of the past. It's time for the girl to wake up from her dream. From now on, only a dark reality awaits her. Rustica's eyes shot open to yet another damn nightmare she was sick of. Last night, she got wasted at Uncle Ben's tavern. Her head was a mess from the hangover, and it was a miracle she was even aware enough to wake up next to a man. The embarrassing scenes from the previous night immediately flooded her mind. Rustica Janus couldn't believe loneliness could drive her to this. She decided to treat that reckless, foolish night as an accident. Slipping away early in the morning was shameful, but she really needed a bolt. Hearing the door slam shut, the man woke up alone in the empty apartment. Seriously, Rustica never thought she'd be enduring a killer hangover on such a beautiful day. She was so ashamed she couldn't even look anyone in the eye. Rumors were spreading everywhere that she never went out unless she was dead drunk. No one understood how this young woman, who used to be so good with children, could have turned into this. She wondered herself. She was damn curious about her own life. Rustica would rather be ostracized than see the disappointed looks on everyone's faces. She didn't want the news to get out that Miss Jeans, whose star had fallen overnight, was now living in the forest. All she could do was try to pretend she didn't exist. That way, everyone would eventually forget about her. It was the best option. Finally back home, she decided to take some medicine as soon as possible. She was sure she was going crazy because she had never taken such a risk before. Exhausted, she collapsed onto her bed, mortified by her shameful behavior. She was supposed to keep a low profile, not get wasted at Uncle Vince's tavern, and drunkenly spout nonsense to everyone. With these thoughts, Rustica passed out and didn't wake up until evening. Sensing something amiss, she grabbed her sword and went outside to investigate the energy, which felt like a wild beast. The whole place reeked of blood, which meant the beast was nearby. Following her natural hunter's instinct, she found the spot where the scent was strongest. Deep in the forest, some mysterious guy had taken down 2 bears at once and was now about to make a run for it. The heroine had to confirm who this formidable brawler was. But when Rue saw his face, she realized he was the same man she had spent the night with. The heroine couldn't figure out for the life of her why this guy was here. He was still sleeping when she left, so the thought that he had been following her crossed her mind. The girl, furious, demanded he explain what was going on. It turned out she just didn't remember sharing bread with him as a child. He even thought she had only given him bread. You could hear the disappointment in his voice when he learned that others had also received chocolate from the young lady. This stung more than any wound, as it was hard to believe she remembered nothing. In that moment, an image flashed in her mind. The young boy soldier she had seen inside the wall. And she had the nerve to abandon that same child, hurting his feelings. After all these years of searching, the young man was overjoyed to see her again. Even with his injuries, the kid felt something was off last night, and he blamed it on his own inexperience. Yesterday was his first time, but he promised to do better so the young lady wouldn't abandon him. Whether from embarrassment or his injuries, the guy passed out cold, falling right on top of her. After all that trouble, she had to drag him back to her place and then patch him up. If he were a normal person, he would have died from internal bleeding. Even for a knight of the Imperial Knight Order, taking down two bears almost barehanded was a difficult feat. If they had really met by the wall, then Rue was still a knight, and she was only 18. Although her memory was hazy, his face stood out in a crowd even back then. But the boy was just a little kid back then, so she thought she was going crazy. She didn't expect to run into him, as it was also unlikely he would lose all his powers at once. The handsome man woke up, opened his eyes, and couldn't take them off his girl. He was so handsome that Rue could barely breathe. Worried that this guy might be a spy sent by the Emperor, she told him to get lost. But he just smiled so beautifully and thanked her for saving him, despite her completely crazy behavior. Despite his body being practically in pieces, he stood up and started looking around her place. The weirder he acted, the more curious Rustica became about him. I mean, only a madman would provoke a bear with just a sword, let alone two, right? But none of that mattered to the guy now, because they were finally together. He was so upset when she left before. Now that he had found her again, he wasn't going anywhere. She didn't think so, feeling that the night they spent together was a mistake. The guy had spent the night with her because he liked her, and now his heart was completely broken. So he naturally asked the girl to say his name. It turned out the guy's name was Hayden Constant Rest on a Beller, but Rue wasn't about to reveal any truths. The girl had been living here for 4 years since they parted at the wall. Since she liked this place and hadn't left once, Hayden decided to move here too. Yesterday was his first time, and he wanted to take responsibility for it. Because he was so annoying, Rue remembered that he used to have white hair. That was because he had tried to cross the wall many times when it was still intact. The Kaleda Empire they were loyal to was no longer the only power. The girl was convinced that the wall was insurmountable, a true miracle of nature. The thing was ridiculously high. You couldn't even climb it if you wanted to, and it was made of some strange material. While he was shopping at the market, the shopkeeper suddenly recognized the girl as someone from the Kaleda Empire. He had heard some rumors from a trader about the wall being breached, but he thought it was pure nonsense. So the old man asked if he had been drinking at Ben's tavern, because that guy's drinks were potent. This was the second outsider to come and say the wall had been breached. If that were true, Rue couldn't even imagine how massive the war had become. This was no joke, and it made her head spin, but she was too exhausted to care anymore. Hayden had waited so long to see this girl, but his dreams were shattered when he found out she didn't remember anything. The kid couldn't even imagine what that bastard Carlos had done to her. Luckily, his injury from the bear gave him a solid excuse to stay a while longer. Just then, a messenger bird flew into the house. Although Hayden didn't think it could find him, the letter's content suggested that Carlos didn't have the full picture yet, as people would start pouring through the gap. So the master decided to stay out of it. He was in no hurry to meet that bastard. Now was not the time to worry about the Emperor. A more important person needed his attention. The hero of Kaleda and his savior, Rustica Janus, the one the master wanted to get his hands on. Hayden's injuries were healing at an astonishing rate. His bones mended with incredible speed, and color returned to his face. Whenever the girl started to get suspicious, Hayden would just laugh and say that the wall had restored his strength. It seemed his recovery was most beneficial to Rue, as he chopped wood like a beast and wasn't afraid of work. But our girl wasn't too happy about his presence. This wasn't the happy ending she had hoped for. It was obvious this guy was super suspicious, and this whole thing wasn't over yet. With his strength and healing abilities, she knew the army should have recruited him years ago. Used to living alone, she had never even realized she was lonely. Before long, the master's messenger arrived. They loved the bear pelts and were willing to offer 50 gold coins for each, so she couldn't refuse. As soon as she arrived, the man paid in cash. It turned out he also knew what was happening in the Kaleda Empire and swore it was reliable information. The whole thing felt like another damn war was about to break out. There were rumors of a demon king appearing on the other side of the wall, a ridiculously handsome man with black hair. The description matched Hayden, but but couldn't be. The rumors about the wall cracking weren't baseless, but she needed to see it for herself. So I decided to go to the North Wall. It was time to go home and pack my things. I ran here because I couldn't stand the way people looked at me after I lost my powers. I was very surprised to see Hayden there as I hiked through the forest. I told him I got money from selling the bear pelts, enough for me to leave this place. He thought it was a good idea for me to leave, but that money was for him. I still couldn't figure out what that guy wanted from me. Living in this world sucks. I don't want to deal with it anymore. Hayden felt that things were bad enough, so why was I being so reckless? It was just one night, so I didn't think much of our little fling. If we ever met again, he could just pretend he didn't know me. If that's what the heroine wanted, Hayden was prepared to back off right then and there. The master would let his lady have some peace. They would meet again soon enough. This strange chain of events just wouldn't add up in the heroine's mind. When Rustica returned, Hayden had vanished without a trace, as if he had never been there. After sorting through all the possibilities, the girl concluded that he must be a mage, and a powerful one at that, capable of teleporting his entire body. Before she could enjoy a moment of peace, she suddenly heard footsteps. Someone outside ordered the knight of the Kaleda Empire to come out and receive an order. The girl reluctantly opened the door and saw Alwyn Rochester on her doorstep. He brought good news. His Majesty the Emperor summoned the girl to return to Kaleda. After angrily chugging a whole can of beer, Rustica flatly refused to go to the Empire. She would rather be thought to have died from alcoholism than return to the one who mocked her. The Emperor's verdict was, send Countess Rustica as a diplomat to the Persian Empire, and now she should be grateful for the opportunity. Seriously, it's not like this was her dream or anything. Since Rue was already 25, Aldwin suggested she see it as a chance to start a new career. As long as Persida keeps sending monsters our way, it's impossible to reach any political agreement. Although it was hard for her to accept, things weren't actually that bad. Besides, I have requested to accompany you as your guard. Rustica may not have a family, but she didn't want to go to a savage country full of monsters. It turned out His Majesty cared so much about the girl that he knew exactly where she was. Aldwin's smug face was unbearable. He was a fanatic who would follow Carlos forever. Back in the day, when Rustica was an imperial knight, she was just like that. She wanted to go to the other side of the wall more than anyone, and now she was getting her chance. Once her mind was made up, the heroine knew there was no difference between dying in this hut or dying on the other side of the wall. Rue packed her bags quickly. She had always lived ready to run at a moment's notice. She planned to come back here later if she could. After all, it was her home. For a mission like this, His Majesty had personally given the guy a teleportation stone. The power of the magic stone enveloped the heroes, opening a teleportation path to Katat Palace. Arriving in the capital of the Kaleda Empire, right in front of Katat Palace, Rue saw the gap for the first time. It was unbelievable. A huge section of the wall had been completely smashed through. This was precisely why the Emperor had summoned the first-class knight to Katat Palace. In the throne room, after all these years, she had returned sooner than she expected. Months had passed, turning into years, until she finally came face to face with Carlos Arthur. The Empire had never seen anything like this, so the boss was completely caught off guard. No one knew what that country was really like, which made the diplomat's job crucial. Rustica had to go there and find her people. His Majesty also ordered her to find out how they create monsters and report back to him. The guide from the other side was already waiting, so she was told to hurry. In the end, all Rue got in return was a decent salary. Still, she had no choice but to do her best. She was sure the Emperor had specifically summoned her because he knew her parents had disappeared on the other side of the wall. This hastily formed Kaleda diplomatic mission to the Persida Empire consisted of only 4 people. First was Rustica Janus, a diplomat, former knight, and now a powerless genius sword demon. Then there was her bodyguard and confidant, Viscount Aldwin Rochester of Malboro. The third was Eliza Barkova, a knight of the Imperial Knight Order, and finally, a servant to handle miscellaneous tasks. Aldwin had volunteered to come, so Rue was pretty sure she was being watched. The heroine was shocked by Eliza's swordsmanship and surveillance skills, which meant she could be an assassin. Martin used to work in the Imperial Palace, so he was definitely Carlos's man. Rustica was surrounded by people loyal to the Emperor. This trip was going to be a nightmare. She couldn't relax for a second. With everything ready, the Imperial Knights set off. Their destination was the Divine Fissure. They were heading to the other side of the wall. Before stepping into that country, it felt like a journey to the afterlife. Alvin was ready. as he was going there for a better life. He had heard that some of their people had already arrived. The naive kid firmly believed that the other side was offering a truce, not a death wish. Most people thought they had grown weaker, which was why a deal was made. A typical thought from someone who thinks Kaleda is the center of the universe. To Rue, everything was obvious now. Under orders from above, the brave heroes had to enter the dark fissure. Everything was set in stone, so Rustica chose to enjoy the simple opportunity to cross the wall. The world hidden behind the divine wall was an eye-opener for the Imperial Knights. They found themselves on a crystal bridge, a gateway to a completely different reality. This was nothing like what Aldwin had seen from the other side. Everything around them could be an illusion, so Rustica told him to be careful what he said. The representatives of the Persida Empire were already waiting for them at the other end of the crystal bridge. Count Simon Kinberg was sent by His Majesty, the Emperor of the Persida Empire. They had prepared a carriage for Lady Rustica Janus, her 2 guards, and her personal manservant. The expectation of monsters behind the wall was shattered by the bright reality before them. In the end, the atmosphere was quite laid back, not much different from Kaleda. The town nestled on a mountaintop was the fortress of Persida, the capital, Shaley. Rustica found herself in a completely different world, one that captivated with its beauty and vastness. It wasn't long before they reached the imperial palace of Shaley. Katad Palace was also luxurious, but this place was breathtaking from the very beginning. The heroine stood before His Majesty the Emperor, surrounded by all the nobles. The son of the Persida Empire, the great emperor, had been waiting for his guests. His Highness radiated a beautiful light, welcoming Lady Rustica to the palace. That flawless face was unmistakable. It was Hayden, the one and only. A hole in the wall, the Persida Empire, the great Emperor Hayden. Rustica wished this was all a dream. There was no way that guy could have been in that backwater place, so she felt this had to be a nightmare. The Emperor Kalei, she had imagined, also believed in the path of peace and harmony. According to the records, Hayden learned that Lady Rustica was from the Imperial Knight Order and could use magic. In the Persida Empire, magic was forbidden unless permission was granted. Simple as that. It made sense, since Hayden knew Rue couldn't use magic anyway. But she felt it was possible someone else was pulling the strings behind the scenes, not him. The Hayden the heroine met in Calais was always smiling and sweet. But this emperor was super noble and pretentious. If you ask me, they didn't seem like the same person at all. His Majesty felt the girl might be going through a tough time, being away from home. Now that she was in Persida, the only thing to watch out for was the alcohol. That stuff was strong. The Emperor said he enjoyed the meeting and hoped Lady Janus would have a pleasant stay. The way this guy talked, there was no doubt it was Hayden. As soon as the meeting was over, Rustica returned to the carriage, and Aldwin breathed a sigh of relief. She suddenly wondered when this kid found out she got the job. After considering it for only 2 days, the guy had volunteered to come with her. It was likely they had started considering her long ago, and Aldwin had learned about it from his father 4 days prior. Hayden had appeared in that nameless territory in the Kingdom of Momentum. It seems the Emperor personally went to scout the diplomat from the Kaleda Empire. Now that today's official business was done, Aldwin suggested they go rest at the Kaleda embassy. That guy had expected they would be treated poorly, but the situation was much better than he had anticipated. Now our girl had a brilliant idea to spread a rumor that the Emperor of Persida was bad in bed. As soon as they arrived at the embassy, a mountain of work was dumped on them. There was no way they could handle such a workload, so Aldwin was sent to hire some workers. Honestly, Rustica was surprised that the embassy provided by Persida was actually quite nice. After writing a to-do list and checking the documents, all that was left was to exchange currency. As a former knight, she had disliked the profession of a diplomat from the start, and now even more so. But if she really felt that way, she wouldn't have come here in the first place. Rustica Janus had been lazing around for 4 years. It was time to get her act together. It turned out that a firm attitude and fighting spirit weren't enough to make things work out. After years of seclusion, dealing with people wasn't easy. Her thoughts were interrupted by a strange young man who appeared out of nowhere. A squad from Kaleda had arrived at the house where the lord next door was staying. He had come here 4 years ago from the neighboring country of Nerva, and this was their embassy. To their right was the Soldstein embassy. They basically owned the whole street. Seeing that they were new to Perset, the guy guessed they had just exchanged their cash. Rustica was actually just about to ask where she needed to go. Perset currently had no information on Kaleda's currency, so he decided to give them some advice. Count Felix Kjurka kindly handed her his business card, saying she could contact him if she needed anything. As he left, he pointed the young diplomat in the direction of the bank. Judging from the business card, this guy was also an ambassador, and it seemed Persetta was now fond of appointing young people. Who would have thought that the bank manager would squeeze these newcomers from Kaleda dry? If the emperor found out they were treating Kaleda's ambassador this way, he would be furious. In this country, there was nothing you could do. They would always treat us as enemies. In any case, they finally managed to exchange their Kael'tan gold coins at a bank. It was a good opportunity to wander around the commercial district and check out the shop with the long queue. Looking at the crowded people, Rustica was really curious what all the fuss was about. There was a newsstand nearby, so she decided to read a newspaper to pass the time. Kaleda had official gazettes and newspapers, which, of course, were filled with endless praise for the emperor. After flipping through hundreds of different newspapers, she finally found one titled Kaleda, The Nation of Thieves. Our heroine just had to buy the one newspaper that directly attacked the Kael'tan Empire. The guy next to her scoffed at the third-rate tabloid, thinking it only knew how to suck up to the rich and hate the poor. Hayden always appeared out of nowhere like a bolt from the blue, and Rustica continued to pretend she didn't know him at all. It seemed they would be seeing each other often, so the emperor asked if he could act as if they were already acquainted. The guy had been very polite and considerate in the castle, which was normal given the circumstances, but it still made her feel uncomfortable. Rustica quickly paid for the magazine and hurried away. Alwyn had entered the shop a long time ago, but hadn't come out yet. Hayden said that everyone who entered that shop completely lost their minds. He only asked that she spare him a little of her time. This guy preferred peace and quiet, but he still came in person to speak with the ambassador. After discussing important matters, he expressed his great pleasure at this long-awaited meeting. Hayden noticed she seemed to be close with Miss Jean's guards. That being the case, he told her it would be best to draw a line with him. The boss was still a bit worried about this so-called colleague of hers, a knight-like assassin who would draw his sword for the emperor without hesitation. There was also a servant skilled in poisons by her side. Miss Jean's guards were truly hardcore. It was hard to tell if they were guards or spies. The emperor had done a thorough investigation, but she couldn't say these words out loud. However, the Persetan Empire wouldn't roll out the red carpet for an enemy for no reason, so there had to be one. To be honest, the handsome emperor just hoped Jeans would understand his feelings. He sincerely hoped she would have a pleasant time in Persetta. To a diplomat from an enemy nation, these words sounded like an invitation to defect. Hayden's only hope was that Jeans would grasp his meaning and be willing to stay here forever. Listen, unless there was a very good reason, Rustica had to refuse. The emperor thought his motives were clear, but my God, he came across as a blatant threat. They had sent Rue from enemy territory, yet he was still offering her a lifeline. No matter how low her status was, the girl still had some pride. Hayden's expression changed in an instant. It was obvious he didn't care at all. The immense pressure was suffocating her. A single glance from the emperor made Rue waver. She couldn't shake the feeling that Hayden could crush her with a single finger. On her way here, the fearless lady had considered all possible outcomes and was even prepared to die with dignity. The terrifying pressure vanished in an instant. Hayden had only meant to scare her a little. To avoid looking like a bad guy, the emperor apologized and promised to be more careful with his words in the future. He wanted to try and earn her trust, but the mere thought of it was too much for Rue. In western Persetta, there was a place called Plash, which spanned across plains and mountains. The count who ruled there was named Jeans, and Rue might be able to find the person she cared about there. While queuing in the shop, Alwyn had honestly thought he was going to die. When he finally got away, he noticed Rustica chatting with someone. Before leaving, Hayden wished the girl a good time in Ciela. Alwyn was surprised to see the emperor here, but with so many eyes and ears around, it wasn't a good place to talk. Rustica planned to report what she and Hayden had discussed to her own emperor in person. After a difficult day in the city, a sumptuous dinner with all sorts of delicacies was waiting for them. Martin was nonchalant about the masterpiece he had cooked with his own hands. If the young lady suddenly craved her favorite dish, the butler was ready to go through fire and water for her. For some reason, the heroine suddenly recalled the emperor's words and now felt uneasy. But Rustica had to eat in front of Martin. Still, she decided to have just one spoonful. The soup was so delicious, she felt she could die without regrets. Suddenly, the assassin in the knight's mask started talking to the heroine. Rustica didn't mention meeting the emperor and promised to include it in her report. Hearing that the events in Cielo were in full swing, Alwyn suggested they get ready as well. In truth, the Keltan embassy was officially considered an enemy, and it was unlikely they would be accepted. The protest that erupted outside the embassy kept Miss Jeans awake for hours. The populace was indeed demanding that the foreign representatives return to their home country immediately. Despite the danger, she went outside. Alwyn appeared the moment he heard the noise. With so many guards, she didn't have to worry about anyone breaking in. She told the knight to get ready, as they still had invitations to send out. As it turned out, they had also received 3 invitations, but Rue's face had already fallen. If everything went according to plan, the heroine would find the noble named Jeans. It seemed only a complete madman would send an invitation to an enemy embassy. Rue ordered all letters bearing the imperial seal to be burned immediately. Another letter announced a meeting of Persetan diplomats. The third letter, the one that caught the heroine's attention, was from a neighboring Navana embassy. In it, Ambassador Felix invited the Keltan ambassador for tea the day after tomorrow, 3 in the afternoon. Rue couldn't ignore this letter and even decided to have Martin prepare a dessert. But a letter with the imperial seal still made her nervous. She decided to just sneak a peek at the contents, and after opening the envelope, she was horrified. Miss Jeans was invited to a tea party at the Persetan Imperial Palace this very afternoon. They treated Keltan diplomats like thieves who had set foot on their land and trampled all over it. Rustica wouldn't even be surprised if an assassin snuck into the embassy tonight. And, of course, that assassin would be stronger than her guards. Starting today, our heroine didn't want to leave Eliza and Martin alone, so she had brought her along too, but now she was starting to doubt that decision. Not to mention, it was dangerous to go out with protesters everywhere, and there was no guarantee of safety at home either. Every day was a new adventure. Just as Rue expected, they had snatched her cake, so showing up empty-handed now felt super awkward. She lost the will to live and simply decided to let them kill her. The young and handsome emperor was hosting an amazing tea party in his palace garden. Hayden was glad she had adjusted to life at the embassy and offered her some tea. The young lady wasn't picky about tea, though she really thought it was just scented hot water. People loved to gossip, so anything she said would spread like wildfire. Rustica was being examined under a magnifying glass, but there was nothing she could do about public opinion. It sounded as if she had been hurt by similar rumors before. The girl was pleased with the emperor's invitation, but didn't understand why he had summoned her. In fact, being able to meet the emperor one-on-one was a great honor in itself. Hayden had other plans and intended to make a friend in the process. Rue's cup was still full, which meant she wasn't exactly thrilled about tea time. Perhaps it was just the location where she was being forced to drink tea. A savage beast's roar made her whip around to see a giant monster. The very model of the beast they talked about in Kaleda looked even more terrifying in person. Seeing that thing, Rustica was filled with rage, realizing what a bastard the emperor was. The monster was closing in, and she couldn't even use magic, but it was too late to run. Strangely, the emperor didn't even blink, so this had to be some kind of test. She faced her fear, unable to kill the damn thing or escape. The bloodthirsty creature, overflowing with power, towered over her. It felt like the end of the world. Just when it seemed everything was about to end badly, a massive blast of magic froze the monster in its tracks. Suddenly, everything changed, as if she had been transported to some bizarre, alternate dimension. The emperor had already mentioned a place ruled by a noble with the same surname as Rustica. It turned out they were on the fringes of Persetta, and from the looks of it, monsters were a common sight here. Persetta had lost its mages, and the stray magic had gathered together, which was why we were seeing these monster tides. If Hayden was trying to scare Miss Jeans with a monster, then mission accomplished. He finally had her attention, and now the guy wanted to know what she was interested in. He apologized for scaring her, but my God, that was a spectacular sight. That sharp gaze made all her emotions and instincts grind to a halt. In fact, after all those years of a reclusive life, her combat instincts had grown dull. Hearing this, Hayden was certain the Keltan emperor must have told her. Only now did Rustica realize this guy had never truly threatened her. It turned out all his hostility from the very beginning had been directed at Carlos. Feelings forged on the battlefield don't just disappear. So Rue thought, Even an old knight would stay sharp. To say she had regressed due to old age was complete nonsense. Rustica desperately insisted her skills were worse than a novice knight's. Now, if this was about her past reputation, then Hayden had the wrong person. She couldn't even lift a sword anymore. But the Emperor thought that was pure nonsense and was even prepared to prove it. She felt it was impossible and thought this conversation was pointless. That being the case, Hayden told her to cancel all her plans and suggested they meet tomorrow. He planned to build trust through constant meetings to make the girl believe in him. Jeans left shortly after setting up a meeting for the same time tomorrow. Just then, the poison test came back negative, and the servant brought his master a piece of cake. Despite the high risk, Hayden couldn't help but taste the gift from Rue. According to the servant, there were reports that the West was being hit by a massive monster tide. Not only did the master know about it, he had already faced a giant monster himself. The Emperor had single-handedly stopped the monster tide in the north, but the wave in the west would be even stronger. The fearless Emperor was ready to move out at a moment's notice. In addition to that, he ordered an announcement to be made about the magical fluctuations detected in Kaleda today. Hayden was eager to learn about Carlos Arthur Ingram and awaited his arrival. Rustica shouldn't have been up so late writing her report. She had started by trying to figure out just who this noble with the surname Jeans was. The girl didn't want to get her hopes up about her parents, but she couldn't remain silent either. If there was even a sliver of hope of finding her parents, who went missing in the war 11 years ago, Rue wasn't going to let it go. She was tired every day, but after what happened today, she felt a strange sensation for the first time in a long while, just like when a young lady had instinctively sensed the monster, filling her with dread. At that very moment, Rustica unexpectedly noticed a strange energy. Magical power swept through the room, and in an instant, Carlos Arthur Ingram appeared. The master was very curious how she was feeling after a few days in Persetta. He wasn't actually there. This was just some kind of illusion. The Keltan Emperor appeared because he was curious how Miss Jeans was doing. It was a very classy way of showing concern, considering he had practically pushed Rue to the brink of death and was waiting for her to be finished off. Carlos hadn't expected the girl to discover that the Persetan Emperor was a complete lunatic. The thing was, Hayden had been trying to get her to defect ever since she arrived. Now he was inviting her to tea and trying to build a relationship, which piqued Carlos's interest. Rustica had been in Persetta for 3 days, but she still couldn't get used to it. Strangely, there were no protests today. Soon, our heroine arrived at the Harlia Imperial Palace to see His Majesty. The boss told her to be on her guard, as he was just going to give her a little lesson in etiquette. He had been talking about banning magic, yet the Keltan Emperor was playing with fire. No one had thrown rocks at her window yesterday, and Rustica hadn't given it a second thought. What really made the Emperor's jaw drop was how casually Carlos had appeared. Turns out the guy saw him with his shirt unbuttoned, waltzing and wearing a blue bathrobe. Hayden considered this a serious breach of etiquette, so he suggested the girl take some etiquette lessons. The Emperor wasn't going to back down, but this risked starting a war between the two countries. He thought he had proven his point, but they didn't see it that way. Suddenly, His Majesty was curious if Miss Jeans even knew how to dance. The girl froze, but she didn't need to be of noble birth to know how to dance. Hayden understood why she was curious, but he still thought she was being reckless. He would take responsibility and blame the Keltan Emperor instead of Rustica. Even if you pulled a stunt like that, the Emperor would act as if nothing had happened if the young lady accepted his offer. So, before she danced for the first time in her life, and with an Emperor no less, the girl really needed to take off her coat. She felt like a worthless dance partner, but Hayden had chosen her. He wanted to teach her himself. Still, being this close to the Persetan Emperor, she couldn't help but feel nervous. Seeing how calm he was, she felt there was nothing to worry about and grabbed his waist. The boss moved her hand to his shoulder, and then, as he drew closer, Rue caught his scent. Gazing into his eyes, the memory of the night they spent together suddenly flashed through her mind. She was afraid of messing up, but Hayden was prepared to endure her stepping on his foot 100 times. Despite her fear, Rustica continued to dance and suddenly stepped on the Emperor's foot. She had stepped on him, but surprisingly, she was the one who screamed. Mortified by what had happened, she froze on the spot, but the guy couldn't let her just run away. If she felt regret, she should stay and not run away again. To prevent Hayden from getting hurt by her heavy knight's boots, Rustica suddenly took them off, becoming barefoot. The Emperor kicked off his own shoes as well, lifted her up, and had her stand on his feet. Unfolding the invitation from the Imperial Palace, she had thought this would be a long and utterly exhausting day. But gazing into the Emperor's eyes, she found herself completely unable to look away. It was only then that she realized that maybe, just maybe, this day wouldn't be as long as she had imagined. Before long, Rustica had learned the basic dance steps and more. It was time for a break, so Hayden invited her to lunch. Today was their boring etiquette lesson, and the next one was supposed to be table manners. So Rustica was a little late for lunch, but my God, she looked gorgeous in pants. In the Empire, it was an absolute no-no for women to wear pants, so she had to wear the clothes they gave her. Hayden was completely captivated, unable to take his eyes off her. It was hard to even read his expression. Noticing how good Miss Jeans looked in the dress, the master gave it to her on the spot. The sunlight felt great, and he wanted to eat outside, but a chill made him move the meal indoors. If Ambassador Jeans had more time, she would surely enjoy a tour of Ciela. Now is not a good time for sightseeing. With too many prying eyes focused on Kaleda, it was a perfect opportunity to take advantage of someone as naive as Rustica. So Hayden advised her to be careful about who she trusted and whose advice she took, what she should be wary of, and what she should embrace in her life. The next day, our heroine returned to the Navana embassy, where Felix was waiting for her. It turned out yesterday's newspapers were full of stories about her, saying the Emperor had done something outrageous to her. As a foreign correspondent, Felix was well-versed in these rumors and knew the Emperor had the power to take on the big shots. After taking a seat, Rustica wanted to learn about the mysterious Emperor, Hayden Rustana Bellers, Emperor of the mighty Persetan Empire. He was the last of the righteous Bellers dynasty, which had vanished 430 years ago. For that long, not a single heir had appeared. Someone had abducted the members of the dynasty and stolen all of Perseta's treasures. And that person was from Kaleda, specifically the Emperor of Kaleda, Carlos Arthur Ingram. Perseta believed that Carlos had taken everything from Perseta. Then a wall was built between Perseta and Kaleda, which were once one. Now, with a wall, their territory had also shrunk. Intelligence suggested that although centuries had passed, Perseta still did not recognize Kaleda. Nearly half of the Persetan emperor's titles referred to the southern regions, now known as Kaleda. As for Rustica's question about the empire's decline, the imperial crest still remained. Felix said the nobles hadn't succeeded because they didn't want to pay taxes regularly. But despite that, Perseta was a country ruled by sages. The fearsome sages, cut off from the outside world, desperately guarded the legacy of the Persetan Empire. They had lived for thousands of years and could still use magic even in an age where it had been forgotten. In Perseta, looking at the various regions, the east had their leader, the Dragon King. The north remained a mystery, with almost nothing known about it. Finally, in the west was the master of the magic tower, the guardian of all magic and knowledge. There were rumors that before the emperor appeared, a certain western sage managed the tower. But according to the ambassador, he was now retired. Magic had always been forbidden in this country, so there shouldn't be anyone in that tower anymore. In any case, those guys wouldn't let the imperial crest be taken down, and they recognized the emperor as the rightful heir of the Bellers family. Presumably, no noble was powerful enough to go against the damned Dragon King. It was better to have an emperor, as the imperial crest wasn't removed during the interregnum of the duchy era. Despite his youth, this new emperor of Perseta was no pushover. He immediately began clearing out the monsters in the northern regions, proving he had both power and strength. In the 400 years of the emperor's absence, the nobles had managed the monsters just fine. Felix pointed out that the eastern region was the only one that truly prospered. They obeyed the Dragon King, who only occasionally sent his army across the wall of Kaleda. They slowly began to encroach on the land until the emperor appeared in the north. In the east, for the eastern nobles, the emperor brought a fear they had never known. A group of them tried to flee to the north, but were stopped by monsters. The emperor was ruthless to those who fled, which was one of the reasons the eastern nobles hated him. And that's how the monsters of the north were conquered in the east. After just 4 battles, The emperor completely disregarded the power or opinions of the Eastern nobles. Felix was certain that the Emperor of Persetta was a true enigma, his intentions impossible for anyone to guess. That's why everyone in the country was scratching their heads, wondering why Miss Jeans was receiving so much attention. The girl had become the hottest topic in Persetta, but that wasn't enough to scare her away. It turned out Felix had heard from the news that the envoy from Coleda was carried out of the palace unconscious. Here, the pen was mightier than the sword. All the diplomats were betting on how long Miss Jeans would last. The boss had only bet on 1 week, which was just too mean. So Rustica had him change the bet to 2 weeks and planned to cheat to make him win. The heroine was very confident in her bet. Hayden wanted her to stay in Persetta, but it wasn't his will that would keep her here. It all depended on what she would discover next. In search of answers, Rustica headed to the Ciela National Library. 2 days ago, when Carlos visited her at the embassy, her plans had changed. Just then, the boss appeared and offered Miss Jeans a new position. He had chosen her to be a minister of Persetta because he understood her feelings about her parents. The heroine knew he had selfish motives behind his promise not to interfere with the search. She recalled once wanting a reward, and the emperor's answer at the time had felt somewhat vague. That day, he promised to help her find her parents and bring his knights back. Once the mission was complete, Miss Jeans would have the chance to live a peaceful and quiet life with her family in Colette. Carlos and Hayden were the two who had both mentioned her parents, and now our heroine had to choose which of them to believe. But first, she needed to know if they were still alive. After a great deal of searching, Rustica finally found some information about Ethan Arthur Jeans and Milan Jeans. When she was 14, her parents disappeared without a trace outside the walls. They had crossed into enemy territory, even gaining noble titles and living a life of luxury. Now, she could hardly believe they had had 3 more daughters. Her parents, she thought, had decided to erase their memories of her and start over in Persetta. It had been a full 11 years since that nightmare, and ever since Rustica had been walking on thin ice, fighting monsters in endless battles, driven by a single damn goal. During that time she was left alone, she watched her own body and mind wither away. She swore to endure it alone, like a true knight and a good daughter, and she promised to break through the siege to rescue her parents. But now, Rustica had appeared in this strange land as an envoy of an enemy nation, messing everything up. Her parents had obtained prominent titles, while Rue was just a nobody who couldn't even wield a sword properly. She was ashamed of it and wanted to run, but there was nowhere to run to. Carlos or Hayden, they were both nice, but she felt there was no point in going on like this. She was all alone, her parents didn't know she was here, and they weren't even looking for her. These thoughts upset her even more, and she didn't know what to do. The next morning, Rustica woke up looking haggard. She had been too upset to sleep yesterday. She hadn't slept all night, and her mind was still a mess. Honestly, she didn't rule out the possibility that the Emperor of Persetta would betray her. It had happened before. Carlos coming in person to offer help made her feel he might be telling the truth. Just when Miss Jeans least expected it, a young maid approached her. This new maid that Martin had mentioned looked even younger than 14. Rue tried to pull herself together so as not to appear dazed in front of the child. As it turned out, Rusilla was well aware that Miss Jeans had come here as an envoy. After confirming that breakfast was ready, she politely said her goodbyes and left. The maid was very cute, and Rue was sure they would become friends. Seeing the girl's tired face, the men knew at once that she hadn't slept well. With that much money, she should have gone on vacation, but an invitation was delivered to the ambassador instead. Rustica even thought everyone there was betting on how long she would last. The girl didn't want to look at the envelope and opened it reluctantly. This morning, she was unexpectedly invited to the imperial palace. As soon as she arrived, the emperor immediately ordered her to change her clothes. She had just gotten there, and he was already making her feel terrible. They were planning to go for a walk today, and, thankfully, the pants weren't too tight. Soon, Hayden was leading her through the woods, but Rustica just couldn't relax. He tried to get her interested, but seeing the same blank look again and again was a real downer. The emperor hadn't prepared anything crazy. It's just that a certain fellow would be very upset if Rue didn't remember him. The emperor wanted her to see him in person to awaken her memories. That's all. Sensing an insanely powerful presence, the girl saw a huge monster charging at her like a freight train. The fear and sense of déjà vu made her heart race, and Rustica remembered him. It turned out the monster had no intention of attacking her at all. It just landed gently on the ground. The heroine came face to face with Icarus, a giant eagle with the body of a dog and huge wings. From the divine beast's attachment to its master, you could tell that it and the Emperor shared an extremely deep bond. It was Hayden who first introduced them, but seeing a friendly monster was a completely new experience for Rue. The confused monster immediately hid, but in reality, it was Rustica who should have been hiding. She couldn't just run away, or the monster would chase her, and even the Emperor wouldn't be able to stop it. Just as its master had said, these two would be seeing each other often in the future. So the heroine held out her hand, and the pet reluctantly let her tame it. Icarus doesn't let just anyone ride it, but Hayden gave a chance to fly. He even offered to help, but she was very confident in her riding skills. The problem was Icarus wasn't a horse, it was a damn griffin. Before she knew it, Rustica was already on the back of the giant bird. The important thing was the safety gear, which absolutely could not be taken lightly. Suddenly, someone called for the Emperor, and the master left the girl alone with the griffin. If even Count Simon was in a hurry to find them, something big must have happened. Being summoned to the palace like this, especially while riding a damn griffin, was just too chaotic. Rustica hadn't even gotten a firm grip when the huge Icarus took off and started flapping its wings. The girl was terrified and desperately tried to get the griffin to lie back down. But then Icarus spread its huge wings as if about to launch into the sky. Icarus, the divine beast of the great emperor of Persada, flew over Shirlea, catching the envoy from Caleda completely off guard. When Rustica was a knight in Caleda, there was a magical creature that all the knights feared. It was huge, terrifying in appearance, and flew so fast you couldn't even track it. It tore people to shreds with its huge claws, making everyone tremble in fear. The only thing the heroine could trust was her instincts as a knight, and the one she was riding now was that very same monster. The girl felt that Icarus was just venting the anger left over from their battle. Before she could point out that it was unharmed after the battle, she felt the monster might be playing tricks. I mean, considering their history of fighting before, Icarus might be trying to annoy her or get some revenge. But the moment the griffin gave her a nudge, she looked up and was immediately stunned by the sight before her. The magnificent view unfolding beneath them felt like a miracle she was seeing for the first time in her life. It seemed Icarus just wanted her to see this, for which Rue was actually grateful. Having been this high up for so long, she had basically been staring death in the face until a hand touched her. Lord Hayden appeared just in time, as his griffin had no intention of landing anytime soon. He didn't remember ever telling Icarus to fly off with Ambassador Jeans. Since the girl was clearly frightened, the Emperor decided to apologize at once. In fact, Rue was only pretending to be scared, so she wouldn't have to see reports about the envoy from Caleda fainting. The master sincerely apologized for scaring Miss Jeans and took control of the situation. He would make sure the girl landed safely all the way down, so he told her to relax. Hayden's original plan was to let Rue get used to it gradually before flying to the highest point, but now he decided to descend while the sun was still out. The sunset view was spectacular, so Rustica was happy to stay a little longer to enjoy it. Just then, the master suggested she lean against him more firmly. If they relaxed their bodies, they could look around at their leisure. The Emperor showed Miss Jeans the different locations in Shala, like the Mel River where a bridge was being built, the diplomatic quarter where she lived, the wide streets, places like the art museum. But nothing she saw registered in her mind, because Hayden was standing far too close. The heat of his body was pressed against her, his breath mingling with her voice as he spoke, and the sound of his heartbeat that Rustica could feel against her back. It all reminded her of that intimate night they had spent together as Rue and Hayden. Logically, she knew she shouldn't be this close to him, but maybe she could enjoy this warmth for just a little while. The road Rue had traveled from Caleda was called Bapel. Any passage across the Bapel Bridge was at the Emperor's discretion. To Rustica, this meant he could take her to see her parents right now. Hayden promised to arrange a formal tour next time. The sunset was worth seeing, but Rue had to leave early because she was worried her neck would break. Early the next morning, Persida was abuzz with talk of the surge and monsters in the west. After sending Miss Jeans back yesterday, the Emperor had said he had something very important to attend to. This made the heroine think it might be because of the monster tide in the Phalus region. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on the door. The maids brought a message. It was a verbal message from His Majesty, telling Miss Jeans to meet him at the embassy in half an hour. 20 minutes later, a still confused Rustica set off to see the Emperor. Because he had told her to hurry, she rushed out, only to find the embassy completely empty. Then, with a whoosh, the great Hayden swooped down on his griffin and pulled her into a bone-crushing hug. This morning was destined to be eventful. Things weren't supposed to go according to yesterday's script. Miss Jeans had no desire to die young. Every time they met, the girl looked so dejected that the Emperor felt she had lost her will to live. After finally calming down a bit, our girl looked ahead, and the sight before her terrified her. Flying over hundreds of knights who had broken through the city walls, the Emperor was forcing her to join this expedition. Kidnapping the envoy from Kaleda had been a distant dream for him, and he was thrilled that he had actually succeeded. At this moment, Miss Jeans was watching Persida's military support from the front row. They were moving so fast that Rustica couldn't even open her eyes. As the wind howled while crossing Babel, the heroes came face to face with the giant jaws of a bloodthirsty monster. As she dodged in terror, the fearless Hayden split the monster in two with a single blow. With thousands of vampiric monsters pouring into Persida's territory, it meant they were in for a long fight. The Emperor suddenly threw the reins to her, leaped up himself, and began to swing that evil-looking sword. Death was staring Rue in the face, so whatever the Emperor was babbling about felt completely irrelevant. Seeing Miss Jeans so fearless, Hayden felt energized, as if he had gained some kind of insane power boost in this battle. Their goal was to go head-to-head with a huge swarm of damn flying monsters. As long as the Emperor could guarantee Rue's safety, she was willing to take the risk. The lady's determination filled Hayden with insane power. He swung his sword, ready to end it all. A huge wave of magic filled with raw power instantly crashed into the monster swarm. Once the threat in the air was cleared, Hayden ordered a descent, and Rustica guided the griffin back to the ground. Icarus Dove toward the ground like a damn missile, hitting it with a bone-shattering thud. And just like that, the monster tide in the wastelands of the Phalus region in northwestern Persida was crushed. Afterward, the knights were ordered to check the bodies to make sure none were left alive. With just 2 attacks, the nearest monsters were annihilated. Now the heroine understood why the previous subjugation had theoretically ended in just 4 battles. Stopping new monsters from appearing and destroying the existing ones seemed easy. However, if the Emperor possessed such immense power, he might eventually surpass Carlos. Hayden was looking forward to seeing Miss Jean's reaction from the front row seat. But having seen enough, Rustica just wanted to go back to the embassy. Now, the girl was more critical than expected, and she didn't understand why she had been dragged here. Hayden was giving the ambassador a tour to show the scale of Persida's army and let her observe the monsters. Just then, they learned that the area was being cleared, but a second wave of attacks was expected. As for Count and Countess Fellas, they were miles away from the castle, leading the charge. They were welcome whenever Hayden decided to visit. Since the masters were away, the Emperor couldn't just waltz into the castle, so he decided to set up camp in Belfort. Rustica found herself caught in a scheme orchestrated by the Emperor of Persida. Shortly after, Persida's armed forces arrived safely at the camp in Belfort. Amidst the chaos, the heroine felt out of place. It was too late to escape now, so she had no choice but to follow them to the Belfort camp. But the Emperor who had dragged her there was ignoring her, busy chatting with others. The Imperial soldiers were busy setting up temporary tents for the night. Rue racked her brain, trying to figure out what the Emperor really wanted from her. The girl was depressed enough as it was, but Icarus kept pestering her. Hayden called it special treatment, but it certainly wasn't doing her any good. As a foreigner from an enemy nation, the people of the Empire were very wary of her. Moreover, Rustica kept hearing about how amazing her parents were, and that they lived nearby. All of this was upsetting her, but she couldn't go see her parents looking like this, neither as a knight of Kaleda nor as an envoy. She didn't know what kind of trouble her failure would cause them. As things stood, she felt it would be strange to even suggest they move back to Kaleda with her. Honestly, her biggest fear was that her parents would reject her first. She wouldn't be able to bear it. When Hayden returned, he couldn't help but notice that the two were getting along well, their bond growing. Seeing the feather in her hair, the Emperor smiled smugly and began to gently remove it for her. The temporary quarters were set up, so he suggested they go inside. Thanks to the Emperor helping her adjust, Miss Jeans was gradually getting used to the battlefield. It turned out it was finally time to meet her parents. Hayden guessed that Rue already knew that the Count and Countess fellows were her parents. More accurately, she already knew, but the ambassador wasn't thrilled about this long-awaited family reunion. The Emperor, thinking about what my lady would like, had no idea how unhappy she would be to see her family. Miss Jeans was rumored to be a brave and loyal knight. The Emperor sensed that her loyalty to him surpassed her feelings for the parents standing before her. This could either be a touching family reunion or a scene where the Count and Countess consider their daughter a disgrace. The unpredictable and somewhat childish Emperor was goading Miss Jeans. Rustica had had enough of this nonsense and drew her sword with a jerk. But honestly, she was no match for him. Not even close. That being the case, the only option she had left was to sacrifice herself. The moment the Knight of the First Order shed blood, a damn magical aura lit up the Belfort camp. The terrified knights rushed into the Emperor's chambers to see him holding a lifeless body. Hayden tried to save Miss Jeans, yelling at everyone to get out and stopping others from entering. Rustica couldn't even lift her sword. Her whole body felt weak and completely unresponsive. But this feeling of helplessness was all too familiar, having been with her ever since she lost her powers. Still, she wasn't sure if the situation was really that bad, like if she would faint just from holding a sword. Feeling something forcing her to obey its command, Rustica's eyes snapped open. Hayden, with tears in his eyes, was trying to figure out why she did that instead of just stabbing him. He had wanted her to attack him, but things had taken a strange turn. She had no idea why he was crying. The first thing she wanted to know was what on earth was wrong with her. Noticing that Rue could see the chains, Hayden decided to ask her if that was really the case. If so, that was good. At least her vision was back. But the girl felt something was very wrong, clearly sensing magic binding her body. She knew instinctively that she had to rip those things off now. Rue couldn't die even if she wanted to, as the magic was linked to her life, but the time was not yet right. As if to prove he was right, power drained from the girl's body once again. Rustica didn't understand Hayden's words, nor the magical chains that had appeared on her. No one had ever questioned the Emperor's actions. In the Kaleda Empire, he was always perfect, and questioning the Emperor was tantamount to treason. But the brave Miss Jeans dared to question the great Emperor. She always had. In order to cross the high walls to save her injured comrades and family, Rue wanted to end this war. In the eyes of the 20-year-old girl, Emperor Carlos seemed uninterested in ending the fighting. Despite this, the girl had not given up hope of getting permission to cross the walls and eliminate the barbarians and magical creatures. R.U. Jeans, a life-loving and somewhat naive rookie knight, had no idea what kind of person the Emperor really was. Carlos valued her loyalty, but that wasn't part of her job. The Emperor bound her with magical chains, ordering her to stay in Kaleda forever and swear her allegiance to him. The heroine couldn't just stand by and let him steal her powers so easily. Rustica woke up from the nightmare, drenched in a cold sweat. But she opened her eyes to see the Emperor right in front of her and realized it was just a dream. Hayden told her not to move. She was still under the spell's influence. She would probably remain unconscious for another day or so. Carlos would never let her die. If Miss Jeans could eat something, the Emperor agreed to drop the subject and explain everything. Rue hadn't been able to use her powers for 4 years, and that's when the magic appeared. He thought it was because of some kind of spell. Hayden believed it was more like a curse and exploitation. Kaleda's genius, swordswoman, and mage, unable to use her innate powers. How could this be? That emerald green light, a symbol of all the power Carlos wielded, meant that he had stolen all of Rustica Jean's power. After yesterday's conversation, she realized Hayden was trying to provoke her, to get her to regain her powers. From that point on, things started happening to the heroine, slowly revealing her true identity. Once her vision was awakened, she could see the raw magic that attracted the monster tides. This was why the Emperor was bound to this place and had to follow it constantly. Rue hadn't been able to see something like this for 4 years, and she had wasted her youth blaming herself. Usually, people would spend more than a week in denial, but our girl pulled through and began to hate Carlos. She had already spent a full 4 years getting through the denial stage. One of Hayden's goals was to take back everything Carlos had stolen from Coleta: land, power, magic. Unexpectedly, Rue's intentions changed, and now she had a new goal. She was going to kill Carlos, and she would allow the Emperor to join her. It wasn't that Hayden didn't want to, he was just afraid of falling in love with her again. So, now that the man was head over heels, Rustica asked him to help her with her revenge. It was a lot to ask, but the girl intended to use the only man who had ever loved her to turn herself into a cold, ruthless, and brutal sword of vengeance. The Emperor wanted something in return. Unexpectedly, the man wanted to meet her parents first. Besides, no one could stop parents who had lived just to see their child. After hearing this, all the worries and stress Rue had been carrying seemed to melt away. Soon, the Emperor left after promising to return, leaving the girl to rest. Just then, she saw a knight trying to stop a carriage that was forcing its way in. Charlotte Melmew, daughter of Baron Granby, had brought some food for the soldiers guarding the Empire. The lady had terrible timing, as outsiders were not allowed in the camp. Suddenly, with a thunder of hooves, another carriage appeared at the entrance. Miss Charlotte was ordered to turn around immediately and go back because, as the young lady said, delivering supplies to the camp was the job of the Falas family, and His Majesty was very busy. Outsiders were not allowed in the core of Belfort, so it looked like Charlotte was simply defying imperial law. That being the case, an angry Miss Melmew pointed at Miss Jeans, calling her an outsider. The ambassador from Coleta was His Majesty's guest, and rumors about him were already flying everywhere. Just when Rustica least expected it, a large swarm of bloodthirsty monsters suddenly appeared in the sky. It seemed these little ones had separated from the main group, so they weren't that scary. However, although the swarm was small, there were some huge ones mixed in. Her fearlessness allowed the heroine to immediately launch into an attack, subduing the terrifying monster. Her eyes, honed by years as a knight, had finally regained their sharpness. Alright, although her body was not what it used to be, she could manage just fine with observation and predicting movements alone. After calculating the monster's next move, the fearless lady dodged and attacked from behind. Rue knew her weapon wouldn't last long, but she didn't expect it to break so damn fast. To salvage the situation, she borrowed a sword from an imperial knight and prepared for a second round. Before unleashing a devastating blow, the desperate warrior told the children to cover their eyes. Fortunately, everything was resolved in the end, and the monster's attack was successfully repelled. The little girls witnessed the terrible sight, which was now deeply seared into their memories. Seeing their terrified looks, Rustica couldn't stand by and decided to go and comfort them. She wasn't really in a state to comfort children, but she couldn't bear to watch them cry. Feeling the warmth of the little ones, everything felt right. Just as things were about to wrap up, His Majesty returned from his business. He noticed that when the girls stood together, they looked remarkably alike. It seemed the old saying was true, like mother, like daughter. Looking at them, Rustica felt a sense of familiarity, as if they were bound together by fate. Sia and Bella really missed their older sister. A week after arriving in Persida, the protagonist met her younger sisters she didn't even know existed. Sia wasn't supposed to come, but the news that Duchess Charlotte was coming here made her change her mind, and Bella wanted to see her sister too. So, Sia couldn't come alone. Hayden said Sia wanted to see her sister and had to be stopped from Duchess Charlotte. After the battle, the man gently wiped Rustica's face, and she let him, for what else could she say? It turned out the magic in her eyes had vanished, as if it had been burned out during the fight. The magic spell on her eyes was simple, and the Emperor helped her with it, but not the other enchantments. Our girl had grown up alone until she was 14, and then, bang, she suddenly met her sisters. Honestly, she was a bit overwhelmed, and on top of that, she was worried about her mother's health. Sia desperately wanted Rue to come home with them, convinced they would live together. Nothing was set in stone, but Rustica couldn't bring herself to lie to the children. Just then, their godfather interjected, saying this was precisely why he had brought Miss Jean. She was happy to see her sisters, but, she was still having a hard time sorting through her thoughts. It was all written on her face, but something else was troubling her deep down. Hayden said that wherever the Count and Countess went, they would always have a room ready for Rustica. He said a grown-up daughter needed her own space, and like Rue, they were anxious about this reunion. Both parents and child were extremely anxious, and it was frustrating to watch from the sidelines. Now, the protagonist would no longer be able to hold back, especially on Count Felius's territory. Suddenly, news arrived that Countess Milangines had requested to be teleported to Belfort. Rustica needed some time to prepare, but Hayden assured her everything would be fine. The magic portal opened, and a woman who looked strikingly similar to her daughter stepped out. Without a doubt, it was Rustica's mother, Countess Phyllis, known as the Iron Lady. Seeing their mother, Milangines, the girls ran to her in tears, crying "Mom." It was a word the protagonist hadn't spoken in a very long time. The person she had longed for day and night was standing right there in the flesh. But even so, she couldn't take a step forward. Hayden knew from experience that Miss Jean had a habit of running away, but at this moment, he didn't think she needed to bolt. Facing the fears of her past, this was the beginning of Rue's revenge. Ahead lay the path the protagonist had to walk. She no longer wanted to be the loser Rustica. Determined to bid farewell to her past forever, the fearless girl stepped toward her destiny. The first thing she did upon seeing her mother was to tell her that she had met her older sister. In that moment, Countess Phyllis held her breath, looking at her grown-up daughter. Their feet moved toward each other unconsciously, lost in the moment, finally reunited after so many years apart. A mother's love bound the mother and daughter together. Their bond had long transcended blood. This was a reunion of a mother and daughter who both felt the exact same pain. This reunion was as painful as the years they were apart, but it was just as passionate. A week after being appointed consul and arriving in Persida, Rue finally met her mother and younger sisters. But because her mother was in the middle of a war, they couldn't spend much time together. It seemed Rustica had to make a choice now. Her long-missed family, or the curse from Carlos that had made her life a living hell for the past 4 years. And in that moment, she knew exactly where she needed to be. When our girl returned, Hayden immediately suggested they get something to eat and have a quiet moment. He was happy for her that she had met her mother and sisters, even if it was all a bit sudden. Rustica wondered what her parents had promised in return for him, bringing her here. But Hayden hadn't brought her here to claim a favor from the Count and Countess. Unlike that petty Emperor Carlos, Hayden expected nothing in return. He said the Count and Countess would be busy for a while, and this fortress would be at the center of the storm. The monster tide in the north was normal, but a large-scale monster tide had appeared in the west. After years of build-up, for the sake of the children's safety, Hayden planned to make this monster tide very tricky. If the Emperor could handle the monster tide properly, the nobles would consider them on equal footing and thus remain quiet. Rustica was deeply moved that her master cared for the people who were the foundation of the nation. To her, these obvious things seemed so foreign under Carlos's rule. Now, the Count and Countess who had appeared 11 years ago held the power, so the protagonist had a choice. Did she want to be the ambassador of the Jean family, or Duchess Phyllis? Our country girl Rustica never thought she would become Baroness Furley and Countess Phyllis in this backwater place. Our girl's fate was sealed. That Count and Countess had already made up their minds. Colette's little cabin was no match for what the Emperor had prepared for her. It was only natural to feel awkward in front of a woman who saw the Emperor as just a one-night stand. After all, this was actually the first time Mr. Hayden had brought up the topic. Rustica decided to find out what he would do if she stayed in Persida. That man was prepared to return everything Carlo had stolen from her, and even cut off his head to avenge her. But Rue just wanted to get rid of the curse, so she could regain her power as a rare magic knight. The curse was very elaborately made, and mishandling it could be life-threatening. It was cunningly connected to all her organs, which meant she could really die. Her eyes were the origin of the curse, so that was the easiest place to break it. After all, before coming to Persida, Rue had stared into Emperor Carlos's eyes many times. Hayden was sure that if Carlos found out Miss Jean had broken the curse and returned, history would repeat itself. But for now, he could remove the curses on the parts of her body far from her vital organs. This was the only chance to make the young lady stay in Persida. Her legs were further from her vitals than her arms, so it was best to free them first. Before we could completely break the curse, we needed to weaken it first. He successfully weakened the curse with his unique power, and Rue saw the chains break with her own eyes. Damn, my legs feel so much lighter. I feel so free. I want to break all these chains right now. It turned out the curses on my neck, heart, and head would take more effort to remove. The Emperor said he would free Miss Jean's right leg after she finished her meal. Although only one leg was freed, in that moment, our girl realized something crucial. For her freedom, she was certain that being with Hayden was the right choice. Thanks to Rustica's concentration, the curse on her other leg was also removed by her master. Hayden planned to finish things quickly in Fellas and then return to Shirlea. During her stay in Fellas, Rustica wanted to spend quality time with her family. After she resigned, His Majesty promised to do everything to get her resignation approved. The girl awkwardly brought up the question of whether she could be trusted, which His Highness had mentioned before. She was referring to how she had seduced him to spend that wonderful night with him. When she said they had to pretend nothing happened, Hayden understood completely. It wasn't something to be broadcast in public, but he couldn't just pretend it never existed. The Emperor had kept his mouth shut about it. Everything was kept secret, and he would continue to do so. But between them, he couldn't pretend that night hadn't happened. He wanted Rustica to remember that night every time she saw him, because Hayden would always remember. He could only accept this fact. His warmth, his tenderness, the gentle way he looked at her that night. He treated her so gently that she couldn't refuse. This was another reason why Miss Jean was afraid to look him in the eye, afraid she would give in to temptation. Honestly, Hayden didn't want to force her to do anything, but if he let things be, she would forever see him only as the Emperor, and that was his greatest fear, the last thing he wanted from the very beginning. Hayden left for a moment and returned after single-handedly annihilating all the monsters with his insane power. His business in Belfort was done, so Rustica decided to go back with the children. She should have been thrilled to be reunited with her family, but something else was distracting her more. Hayden occupied her thoughts, probably because it was the first time she had seen him lost in thought. The journey home was swift, and soon she was back at the palace. Her father was waiting for her in the courtyard. He had been looking forward to this moment. And just like that, Miss Jean was reunited with the family she thought she had lost. Even though Hayden had taken good care of Rue during their time in Shale, today was still too much for her. She probably felt terrible at the embassy, so it was no surprise that she fainted. The Count was grateful to Hayden for bringing his daughter back and didn't regret letting him stay for a week. If it meant a father could see his daughter again, a week's wait was nothing. Mr. Hayden planned to leave Belfort as soon as possible, so the schedule was already tight. He mentioned that he had only managed to remove the curse from 3 places on Rue's body today. The curse was directly linked to her life, also intended to stop her from rashly ending her own life. But the Emperor took full responsibility for breaking the entire curse. Interestingly, the girl herself had also asked him to remove the curse so she could deal with Carlos too. After the suppression operation, a victory celebration would be held in Shala, and it was then that Count Jean received the proposal to formally introduce his daughter, Rue. Appearing here as an envoy of Kaleda was a huge stain on her in high society. But Hayden told us to follow his plan and promised he would personally escort her to the banquet. At the victory celebration for the Jean family's achievements, the Emperor would announce his partnership with Duchess Falesa Rustica. The Count was certain that if they introduced their daughter to high society now, they would tear her to shreds. Ethan was thinking too far ahead in his anger, so Millen did her best to calm him down. But his fatherly instincts were screaming that the way Hayden looked at their daughter was different. In fact, Rue was already 25 years old. She was an independent woman, not a little girl anymore. It was hard for her father to accept that she no longer needed to sew uniforms and buy swords like before. Now all her parents had to do was support her and make sure she didn't get too obsessed with breaking the curse and getting revenge. Ethan wanted to be by her side to make up for lost time, and he definitely didn't want her to get married. After a while, Rustica woke up completely disoriented and with no idea where she was. First, a maid kindly offered her a glass of water. She had fainted from crying after talking to her father, but she figured she couldn't have been out for long since the sun hadn't set yet. The first thing Rustica did was go to the bathroom to wash off the grime of the previous day. Duchess Millen had even prepared various styles of clothing for her daughter. The clothes were so chic that Rustica could totally feel her mother's taste. She chose a light white dress with blue frills, which made her red hair stand out even more. The palace was ridiculously huge, and she almost couldn't find the stairs to go down. As she came downstairs, she ran right into the emperor, who was completely captivated by her beauty. The old man was now glad he had waited to be able to see her looking so stunning before anyone else. He was so mesmerized by her appearance that he almost forgot to ask how she was feeling. Rue felt very light now, and her legs felt unusually heavy, as if she was about to lose her balance. Just as Hayden was about to ask her to dinner, she spotted her father behind him and dashed toward him. Rustica really liked the dress her mother had picked out, and she told her father so. It turned out the Count was much sharper than Hayden had thought, and so the banquet to celebrate the safe return of the Count's eldest daughter began. At the dinner table, Hayden announced that Duchess Rustica had decided to move to Persida, and he couldn't let her stay in this estate. She was a highly skilled knight in Kalavi, and to waste such a valuable talent in Persida would be foolish. The Count was very grateful that he saw his daughter's potential and had no intention of keeping her at home after knowing all this. The Emperor decided to go to the Magic Tower with her tomorrow. He planned to travel quietly, just him and Rue, leaving everything else to her family. The West Magic Tower was originally a place where the mages of Persephone trained and researched magic. But centuries ago, during that kidnapping incident, the Tower Master's magic and power were stolen, and the one behind that crime was none other than Kaleda's emperor, Carlos Arthur Ingram himself. During the incident, the Tower Master was seriously injured and all her students were killed. As a result, the Magic Tower Master handed her position over to the Emperor and lived alone in the ruined tower. All of this led to rumors that the tower had been empty for centuries and that any uninvited guest would be cursed. However, the Guardian's appearance at Hayden's coronation shattered those false rumors. After flying a long distance, the heroes finally saw the magic tower below. Below the tower were the remains of nearby houses and the ruins of buildings that once stood next to her. According to the Emperor, the current master of the Magic Tower had no intention of rebuilding them. It broke her heart to see her beloved research destroyed, which is why she hadn't left the tower for centuries. Part of the Emperor's purpose for this trip was to get her consent to rebuild the tower and to check on her health. Rustica was Phyllis's heir, and they were both ruined by the same person, but they were completely different people. Once the monster tide subsides and that prominent noble family gets on its feet, people will start flocking here. The protagonist was sure it would be difficult for the Count to manage such a large territory and that he would need help. As the heroes approached, a positive signal came from the tower, welcoming them. Thankfully, Icarus descended slowly and made a successful landing. The Lord's appearance caught the heroes off guard. He suddenly burst out of the bushes, calling out to the Emperor. Sir Roderick blurted out that the Magic Tower was just too big. Sir Roderick Callahan was a mage, and he was now helping the master of the Magic Tower. Seeing Miss Jean, the kid couldn't believe he was meeting Jean, the Guardian of Qatar. Since he knew that nickname, it wasn't hard for Rue to guess he was one of the Imperial Knights. Roderick was a second-class knight of the Imperial Knights, and he was honored to meet a Kaleda knight. But he never expected that the Kaleda consul he was waiting for was also Duchess Jean. For now, though, Rustica had no intention of doing anything that would benefit Kaleda in the slightest. According to Roderick, there were still many people here who couldn't forget their past in Kaleda and want to go back. But most of the materials were lost, so the mages from Kaleda all left in great frustration. First, the heroes stepped onto the teleportation magic circle leading to the upper floors. This was all new to Rue, but she was ready to be teleported up. Just before meeting the Tower Master, Hayden suddenly left, telling her to wait. Not wanting to waste time, she asked Roderick to tell her about the history of Persida and its guardians. He knew that Persida and Kaleda were originally just one country, protected by 5 guardians. These wise ones each guarded a region, the ruling dragon clan in the east and the guardian of the tower in the west. And from the beginning, the ruler of the center was traditionally the emperor of Persida. Over the past centuries, some guardian positions became vacant due to Carlos Ingram. After he made himself emperor, he got rid of the real emperor and exterminated the royal family, ending the guardian's bloodline. The Dragon Lord was furious, banished Carlos, and left the throne vacant, waiting for the guardians to return. After that, Carlos returned to the occupied lands. They erected a barrier, and the Kaleda Empire was thus born. As for the last guardian, the one from the south, her name was Rustica. Carlos, who founded the Kaleda Empire, was once the sage of the south, but he built his empire on robbery, murder, and theft. And get this, she was born surrounded by a barrier and lived her whole life protected by it without even knowing. These lands were built on theft, born surrounded by a dam barrier. Rustica couldn't believe the story of Carlos stealing everything and putting up this barrier was actually true. When she arrived in Persida, she heard that Carlos had built a wall, but she dismissed it as a rumor. To be honest, she was skeptical of the guy's actions, even when she was in Caleta, because the barrier was Carlos's protection, something he wouldn't even think of crossing. It was now clear why Miss Jean was kicked out of Caleta. Back then, Rue dared to ask the Emperor to cross that wall, and as a result, she was stripped of her power and exiled, losing everything. Well, now it was all clear. None of her misfortunes were her own fault. It was just bad luck. Seriously, the worst kind of bad luck. Soon, Hayden allowed Miss Jean to enter, and she got the chance to meet the Tower Master. The Emperor introduced Ophelia Quintelet Alicia, the guardian of the tower, who had handed over control to him. Rustica's introduction was very humble, truly befitting a knight. Ophelia offered the girl tea and commented that Carlos had become even more shameless. Just then, the Guardian of the West touched her head, and the protagonist felt the magic chains on her. That was just awful. Carlos had really used the powers he stole from Ophelia. It was so horrible and disgusting that Rue didn't even want to look at it. It was time for Ophelia to return to her position as a sage. Hayden had ascended the throne, the barrier was open, and Duchess Rustica had returned to Persida. Like it or not, the world had changed drastically. If that was an offer to return her to her post, the lady flatly refused. The reason was that she had been exploited for too long and had lost her edge. Duchess Rustica was now going through the same thing, which was why she ran away. Even if Ophelia escaped, nothing would change, so she quietly waited for death. As for Miss Jean, if she had a chance, she would definitely take it. According to the Guardian of the West, breaking the curse would take a long time, and it might not work at all. But as long as Rue had one hand to hold a sword and the strength to swing it, that was enough for her. Then, it dawned on the lady that this was the path His Majesty had chosen. Ophelia Quintet could no longer hide her position and offered a tour of the tower. This magic tower was completely empty, and Carlos Ingram was definitely behind it. He stole all the precious magic books, ancient documents, and research, then burned the rest. This place had been a mess until the mistress's students cleaned it up. And it wasn't just books. Other artifacts were stolen too. Carlos took everything from here to build his empire, and he was still doing it, draining the power of the Western sage. The Emperor of Caleta not only cursed them, but he also drained their power. He took advantage of the defenseless Ophelia, Quintelate, and Rustica genes. The scars of long-term exploitation were deeply etched into this place. Countless important artifacts were once here. The Sword of Azah, the Staff of Nanaki, the Necklace of Velan. Suddenly, Rustica asked to return to the embassy. She was going to give that thieving bastard a taste of being robbed. 3 days after the kidnapping incident, Consul Janus returned to the Caleta embassy. She needed to return to Caleta as soon as possible, so she asked Alduin for help. Rue had to report the situation to the Emperor immediately, especially the size of the Persida army. Although it would be difficult to explain all the details, she had to rush back to report. If the Emperor of Persida found out she knew everything, all hell would break loose. Alduin finally agreed to help and ensured no one could track her. He gave her a magic stone made by the Emperor of Caleta, guaranteeing her safe passage through a portal. Rustica abandoned Persida and left the child behind. This girl suddenly teleported away, scaring the people around her half to death. However, the figure of Hayden still lingered behind her. The woman of his dreams, a person secretly plotting revenge. They couldn't get caught, so Rue told him to keep his mouth shut. Rustica Janus made a statement, requesting an audience with His Majesty. Seeing her sudden return, Carlos guessed that she had discovered Persida's secrets. During her days with the Emperor of Persida, she had discovered some intelligence. First, the number of knights under the Emperor and the size of the Western army were far larger than expected. They all rode creatures that resembled demonic beasts, and their numbers were too great to count. All the nobles were only concerned with protecting their own status and expanding their territory. They were used to the Emperor being missing since birth, so Carlos was convinced this was the case. Another secret Rustica discovered was one the Emperor had told her. Apparently, according to Hayden, a new guardian had appeared in the south. The emperor then told her to come back in 4 hours, giving her time to relax and rest. Before that, she was worried Carlos would notice that some of the curses on her had been lifted, but she got away with it. This was likely because Hayden had cast an illusion on Miss Yentz before she arrived. With no guard around, Rustica decided to take the opportunity to slip away. But at the worst possible moment, a knight followed her, so they ended up having to walk together. Carlos acted faster than expected, ordering his men to activate the magic circle. Since Carlos was away, the heroine also decided to make her move. As the guy clumsily followed behind her, Rustica suddenly turned a corner. Just as he chased after her to stop her, bang, the fearless chick landed a punch right between his eyes. A suddenly appearing Hayden was surprised to see her rummaging through the poor guy's belongings. The girl stripped the man's clothes off and ordered the emperor to change into them. Since he had decided to stop standing by, it was best to disguise himself as someone from Kaleda. Now he was told to cover his body and legs, and also to cover his face so as not to attract attention. They could be in danger at any moment, so it was actually a good thing that Hayden was protecting her. While the boss was away, they needed to retrieve the stolen items and mess up his place. It turned out that the entrance to the archives, where secret knowledge was stored, was heavily guarded. But Rustica's skills were still top-notch, and she skillfully took care of the guards. The inside of the archives was usually crawling with guards, so the heroes decided to stay hidden. There were no guards at the entrance, so Rue decided to sneak in by going around the outer wall. On the way, 2 guards were spotted, and the girl knew she only had one chance. She struck first, taking one of them down by plunging a sharp knife into his chest. Rustica lunged at the mage without hesitation, ready to finish him, but her sword missed, so she had to take him out. On the second try, the noise drew unwanted attention. Although Miss Yentz could have done it all silently, she couldn't risk lingering and decided to lure the guards inside to deal with them. There, the guards pursued relentlessly, and Rustica found herself facing 6 of them. Before the young lady could come up with an escape plan, a devastating attack came from outside, taking out one of the enemies. It all happened so fast that the master just couldn't hold back. Hayden got jealous seeing his girl surrounded by those guys. Just then, the situation escalated as the Imperial Guard lunged at them. In the attack, Rustica simply threw away her sword, becoming unarmed. Meanwhile, on the other side of the room, while Hayden was distracted, a certain knight launched a sneak attack on him. Fortunately, our girl found a replacement weapon in time and saved the Emperor of Persida. Rue didn't even realize that the thing she had grabbed unleashed a powerful shockwave that knocked back the Imperial Guard. She had just picked up a staff lying nearby, but it turned out to be much more powerful than she had imagined. Now she could hardly believe that this thing had taken out all the guards. Even so, Hayden had never asked her to protect him. As a former knight, Rustica felt it was her duty and responsibility to protect him. The Emperor gazed at her, completely captivated, realizing he had fallen in love with her all over again. But for now, their main task was to find these identical-looking artifacts. The scepter Rue found was the most valuable item here, and it even had a special name. When they had finally gathered all the artifacts, the Emperor suddenly heard a commotion outside. Judging by the sound, it seemed they were about to be discovered. There was no time for idle chat now, so Rustica decided to get them out of there as soon as possible. There had to be a place to hide behind one of the walls in the palace corridor. With a light tap of the scepter, she opened an entrance to a secret location. It was safe here, so she suggested they catch their breath before moving on. She had seen Carlos come out of there once, which was how she knew there was something behind the wall. But looking around, she didn't understand what they were looking at. The entire secret chamber was filled with torture instruments, all stained with blood. One could only guess what Carlos had been doing in here. But what horrified the heroes the most were the large vats filled with children. Seeing the small, tortured, and mutilated body, Rue couldn't believe a human being was capable of this. Hayden expressed the deepest gratitude on behalf of the Persida Empire. Thanks to Miss Yentz, they were able to find the bodies of the missing royal family members. What the Emperor had witnessed was the most horrific and shameful event in Persida's history, and the deepest disgrace, a feeling that could never be shaken off. When the others learned what had happened, they could hardly believe it was true. Hayden and Rustica had joined forces to find those who had disappeared long ago. These were all the surviving children. Sadly, they couldn't find the rest. Of the 47 who went missing, only 5 children returned as corpses. Actually, it wasn't 5, but 6, including Hayden, who returned alive. Their funerals would be arranged later, but for now, the boss suggested they take a look at the artifacts. Rustica didn't find the Emperor's crown, but she got the scepter. It was a magnificent treasure, and they could use it to lift some of the curses on Rue. Miscience also brought a belt, which she didn't know what it was, but it was stored with the scepter. A tearful lady, Ophelia, snatched the belt, held it tightly, and closed her eyes. The power emanating from the treasure was consuming Carlos's curse. Hayden felt they had a chance to break one of the curses and immediately threw himself into it. This was insane. Ophelia was being overwhelmed by the very magic she relied on to live. After a while, the green tail finally began to react, and Ophelia's condition improved significantly. In the end, one of the curses that had plagued the Guardian for years was lifted. Ophelia's most cherished treasure was called the Star of the West Heaven, a symbol of her power. Carlos had used the power of the scepter and the Star of the West Heaven to place the curse on the Guardian. This was why Hayden was able to break the curse while channeling the power of the Star of the West Heaven. In addition, Rustica also swiped an artifact that looked like an orb, a pearl necklace, and some kind of ring. They were once symbols of Carlos, but after stealing the Emperor's symbols, he wouldn't be needing them. After handing over all the artifacts, Miss Rustica left to submit her resignation. Only Hayden and Ophelia knew that these artifacts originally belonged to Miscience. As Hayden tried to destroy them, an ominous sound suddenly came from the pearls. The sound meant that Carlos had realized his treasures were missing, and it seemed he had already found the culprit who dared to deceive him. Without delay, the heroine immediately wrote a letter of resignation to the Emperor. She felt the letter would be accepted, as she hadn't written a single word to insult him. Even though it was only a little, her body felt much lighter after the curse was lifted. The fact that she could wield a sword gave the girl hope. She decided to return to Phyllis the next day, when she suddenly felt someone behind her. Caught off guard, Rustica was roughly grabbed by a man before she could run. No one gets away with provoking the great Emperor of Kaleda, and now he was truly pissed off. He was furious, squeezing the girl's throat harder and lifting her completely off the ground. Just then, a kind of magic wrapped around the Emperor like a noose, stopping him in his tracks. The boss was sent flying, and Rustica fell to the ground. This quick-reacting savior had heard that the Emperor of Kaleda was obsessed with his so-called honor. Hayden was disappointed to see that Carlos had neither honor nor decency, threatening and attacking a bound knight, which was not something an emperor should do. But in Carlos's eyes, it was still better than Hayden breaking in like a low-life thief. Thanks to Hayden, his knight dared to be insolent, but this boss had no idea what kind of person Miss Rustica really was. It was precisely because Kaleda couldn't understand this that he could never become the Emperor of Persida. Ophelia had no intention of missing the moment when fate finally caught up with the #1 scumbag, Carlos Ingram. Carlos thought she would be locked in that garbage heap forever, crawling pitifully. But Ophelia was walking just fine, and she was going to make that lowlife regret underestimating her, especially when he couldn't even handle the power he had stolen. He stole it. No wonder all those who had blindly served him betrayed him the moment they got here. Carlos thought it was because those pathetic losers had fed them a bunch of nonsense. But he tried to blame them, even though he himself had been suspicious of Miss Rustica the moment she appeared. The thought of Miss Rustica choosing Persida and its emperor over Carlos sent a chill down his spine. He couldn't believe it was true, convinced that the girl wouldn't do such a thing. His desperate tone and reaction made him look like he had been betrayed by someone he trusted. Seeing the Emperor of Kaleda like this was disgustingly pathetic. He had never considered the suffering and disappointment Rue had endured under him. The girl was just a pawn, and seeing him pretend to be hurt made me want to puke. Carlos was convinced that Hayden was a threat to his knight. But the truth was, he helped Rue meet her parents, gave her a title, and most importantly, he was slowly lifting the curses Carlos had placed on her. Rustica was convinced that if he had wanted to, he would have done it himself long ago, and she threw the letter in his face. This was why no one from Kaleda had decided to go back. No one wanted to acknowledge a thief as their emperor. The accusations were too much for the great man, and he immediately blasted the girl with magic. According to Ophelia, if the girl resisted any further, her body wouldn't be able to take it. Hayden stepped forward and ordered Ophelia to cast a banishment spell. He just wanted to end this conversation. He told Carlos that if he wasn't happy, he could cross the barrier again and steal everything all over again. and he'd better take that resignation letter before he left, because he wouldn't forgive anyone. The ruthless emperor of Kaleda disappeared, and the hall finally fell into a dead silence. For the first time ever, Rustica had finally dared to defy the emperor she had served. Her words had clearly stung him, and in the end, he was driven out in disgrace. The look on his face in that final moment was definitely her first victory against him. The heroine had finally triumphed over her master, the man who had bound and deceived her. It was a huge victory, but a double-edged sword for the young Miss Yentz. The injury on her neck from Carlos's grip was quite severe. It would take time to heal, during which she would need medication. Rustica didn't get too involved, as it was her own business, but Hayden was still angry. He was just too worried about her getting hurt and had been too late to help. Guilt crushed him. He felt he should have protected Miss Yentz. It would be much better if she could protect herself, but for now, she was under his wing. In fact, Hayden saw a fire in her, the kind that could give her the strength to personally cut off Carlos's head. He had never seen anyone resign like that. Rue was burning with the fire of revenge against Carlos. Hayden decided that he would lift the curses on her, no matter what. Now, that part of Ophelia's curse was lifted, perhaps the lady could also be freed from her curse. But considering her current state, it would be an uphill battle. Carlos had hit a vital spot, and she was in a state of shock. Rue couldn't push herself now. The emperor wasn't just worried. He was stressed about many things, but never this much. But this girl was the type to race against time and push forward. The problem was, this man didn't have time for idle chat either. His heart was pounding, his words struck a chord, and she found it hard to calm her own heart. The emperor's words were completely sincere, without a hint of a joke. Rustica understood his meaning perfectly, but it wasn't just the words. Even before he spoke, she had felt everything that had happened from a single touch. How worried Hayden was for her, how sorry he was for not being able to protect her, and how much he cherished her. He was no longer hiding his feelings, and they had become impossible to ignore. This excessive display of emotion blurred the lines they were supposed to maintain. The heroine knew this, but she couldn't bring herself to look him in the eye. Because as long as Carlos's shadow loomed over her, she felt like she was taking advantage of Hayden's feelings. She needed to borrow his power until the curse was lifted. After all, it was just a one-sided affair, something she could never reciprocate. Late that night, Hayden showed up to see Ophelia and check on her condition. When he appeared at this hour, the lady knew at once that he wanted something. Before leaving the tower tomorrow, he wanted to weaken Rustica's curse. He needed her help. Ophelia, still not fully recovered, suggested he ask the Dragon Lord instead, but Hayden felt that even a little help from the Guardian of the West would be better than nothing. The artifacts couldn't deal with Rustica's curse, which was one that had accumulated power for hundreds of years. So after Carlos gave up being a sage, he had been draining the power of every newborn successor. The heirs of the Southern Guardian they never found must have been born and died there, until Miss Rustica appeared in Persida. Hayden remembered the warm, almost reverent feeling he had when he met her. She had actually found him when he was a foolish child and a terrible warrior. Rustica had burst into his life like the sun. Carlos's great plunder and betrayal happened centuries ago. He spent 7 years looting the imperial treasury and the stores of the Magic Tower. In addition to that, he eliminated the adult members of the royal family and snatched the young ones. 47 royal children went missing because of this. 430 years later, only 5 of them returned, and all as corpses. And among them, there was one survivor, Hayden Constant Rustanebeller. The entire empire mourned for Albert Udrich Beller and for Miss Rosenbeller, the daughter and son of Duke Lemberg. The sun and moon grieved together as ash and shadow fell upon the White City. Louisa Olga Leslie, daughter of Count Mael, Clarissa Tiramagnus, daughter of Duke Guienne, and Richard Alexander Beller, son of Grand Duke Belua, all fled into eternal exile. The golden hair of these children gave Rustica a vague memory of Hayden, a pale boy with unevenly cut blonde hair, staring at her with dead eyes. Now, that boy was bidding farewell to all the missing on behalf of the last survivor. The heroine didn't know where he was or what he was doing when that blonde hair turned black. Beyond curiosity, Rue's heart also went out to him in pity. When the 5 dead children returned, the entire empire went mad. So Hayden felt he'd better end this conquest as soon as possible. Right now, Sir Simon was running around the city like his tail was on fire. Hayden was supposed to visit the girl this morning, but he got held up. Just then, The boss told her he planned to lift the curse soon, but Ophelia was certain it was still too risky to touch the curse related to her head. Lifting too much or too little of the curse could have serious negative effects. Carlos had bound the girl so tightly that Ophelia was curious how she would react when they lifted them all. Seeing Miss Yentz so full of life, the Guardian decided to lift some of her curses. As soon as Hayden got a firm hold on Rue, the mistress began to chant the spell of magical renunciation. The curses were woven into her very sinews, and the closer they were to her heart, the harder they were to remove. Ophelia gave it her all, desperately fighting against the demonic knots that were consuming her life. As she pushed her power to its limit, Rustica felt a sharp pain throughout her body. Fortunately, the pain was fleeting and she was fine. The curse around her eyes wasn't strong, and her legs, being at the end of her body, were easier to break. As Ophelia said, the closer to the heart, the tighter the bonds. That's why they needed to reclaim the power Carlos had stolen to get rid of it completely. They had been reunited for less than a month, and had already been through so much crap. From now on, they just had to fight side by side. Hayden swore he would always be by her side. A strange sensation wrapped around her, and her body felt as if it were losing its balance. They would change their approach based on how her body reacted. Hayden offered to help so they could attend the upcoming ball together. As the daughter of Count Felice, Rustica had to make an appearance in high society. I mean, the Emperor wasn't planning on making her a knight just yet, though she would have loved that. Lately, the girl had been focused on lifting her curses, so revenge was her top priority. The problem was, if Rue kept thinking about that bastard, there would be no room in her heart for Hayden. Her obsession with Carlos stung the man's heart, because hate and attraction are two sides of the same coin. Despite what he wanted, Rustica had no intention of going to the ball. She needed to buy time to lift the curses. It was too soon for her to join the Imperial faction. She still had a long way to go. In fact, the Emperor was ready to help the girl get her revenge and join the Imperial faction. But if that were the case, he wanted the lady's eyes on him. He was even prepared to strip naked. It seemed the Emperor would be attending the ball alone, and since he was no longer a virgin, marriage was out of the question. But Rustica turned him down, telling him to find a better woman than her. Hayden wasn't deterred by this. Those words only made him pull her closer. This man had waited for too long, reliving her smile in his mind every single time. He couldn't marry anyone else, so he dreamed of the day Rustica would take responsibility for him. It was time to head to Shaley, and our heroes were all set. But the strong-willed Shay and Bella were also packing their bags, not letting their sister out of their sight. Seeing them, Hayden tried to explain that Rustica had official business in Shaley, but the girls would do anything to follow their sister and godfather. Shay emotionally threw herself into her sister's arms, begging her not to leave them. The girls wouldn't let her go. They had always dreamed of living together. Rustica had to leave, so the Count and Countess stepped in to comfort the children. After saying goodbye to her father, she promised to see him at the state funeral in 3 days. The Emperor held her tightly, taking responsibility for her safety. Icarus spread his wings and shot into the sky. It was time to return to Shalia. It turned out Icarus had no idea what kind of predicament Rue would face, surrounded by that pack of nobles. But now she had a mom and dad who would always be by her side. Rue was finally no longer alone. Her family was with her forever. Soon, news that the Emperor had concluded his expedition and would be returning home spread throughout Hylia. People could hardly believe he had resolved the issues in the West so quickly. Those elites really shouldn't have underestimated him because of his youth. Just then, the wings of magical beasts cut through the sky, and Imperial soldiers appeared in the heavens. Cheers erupted from the ground, with people wishing His Majesty a long and prosperous life. Nothing had happened during his absence. Otherwise, he would have been reported to immediately. The state funeral was proceeding according to protocol, with priests looking after the bodies and a ceremony held every morning. Simon wondered if, during the funeral, the Emperor intended to have Lady Rustica stay in the palace. Rue didn't need any of those formalities. She just needed to be by Hayden's side. After teleporting to the Imperial Palace, Hayden decided to show off all the spoils of war he had collected. Rue had personally looted the treasury of Katat Palace, and seeing even the court count mesmerized by them. You could tell they were truly magnificent treasures. Simon suddenly realized that the boss shouldn't be acting as if Lady Rustica was his private property. Basically, the Emperor couldn't publicly claim ownership of a lady who had not yet revealed her identity. It was like Hayden declaring war on all the men vying for Rustica's affection, and he naturally believed he would be the final victor. The imperial family announced a 10-day mourning period for the 5 returned family members. But even during the mourning, reporters were still doing their own thing. They broke the explosive news that Kalida's regent had been suddenly replaced, and Alduin knew very well that the Emperor of Persida had something to do with it. He saw Hayden running around with Rustica, and the media even said he was using her. However, Eliza believed that Lady Rustica was an adult and could make her own decisions. The young man was angry because all the Emperor did was announce Miss Jean's dismissal and then appoint Alwyn Rochester as the new regent. Rustica had made her choice, and His Majesty understood. He couldn't believe all this was happening. He knew that girl was different. Rustica had left, and Alduin had become Kalida's ambassador, so Eliza's mission was clear from the start. Her target was the shadow that would expose the traitor. The news that Lady Rustica Jean had found the bodies of the 5 royal family members was like a bolt from the blue. Eliza now only needed His Majesty's command. The newspaper headlines also reached Rustica, and Hayden couldn't wait to see her reaction. Thanks to him, she was now a target for everyone in the Kalida Empire and couldn't leave the palace. Still, she hadn't expected the Emperor to grant her such high honors for finding the bodies. For now, though, that guy was only concerned with whether her bed was comfortable and if the food suited her taste. He had learned from a certain lady that guests must be treated with great care. Although Hayden had made a fortune selling the bears he caught, he remembered the girl saying she was now penniless. Her life savings were in that cabin in the woods, which was her home. So that guy decided they would go back and retrieve what rightfully belonged to Rue. They hadn't been gone long, but the sight before them caught them both off guard. The entire cabin looked like it had been broken into by a bear, and one that knew how to use the damn door. It looked like they had ransacked the place, but the girl was more worried about the children. The woman who taught them to read and write had disappeared, and then a bunch of nasty guys broke in and smashed the place to pieces. It seemed Rue had accepted that the home she had lived in for years had become like this. Seeing this scene, our girl felt no one was around and decided to slip away. However, Hayden didn't follow immediately, deciding to take a quick look around first. From the looks of the scene, it seemed Kalida hadn't used any magic here. Rustica moved cautiously through the birch forest, taking every step with care. She was trying to find the spot. When she reached a specific tree, she asked Hayden to hand her the shovel. Since that guy had completely forgotten about it, he decided to personally take on the task of digging up the deeply buried treasure. He wasn't about to dig with his hands. He just used the magical power locked in his hands. And just like that, our girl finally got her gold bars back, the ones she had missed so dearly. Furthermore, she had exchanged a few gold bars for some gems, just in case. The number of gold bars was pitifully small, and the Emperor couldn't believe they had used Rue for such a paltry sum. She truly had nothing else. Not being greedy enough could also be a problem, but the heroine considered herself very greedy. There was no desire stronger than wanting to kill the Emperor. Besides that, she dreamed of living with her family, as she hadn't been able to for a long time. In fact, she considered herself timid and sensitive, not as amazing as she appeared on the outside. But as a knight, she shared her rations with hungry young knights and suppressed all the jealousy around her. As a result, she even forgot she had promised not to send him to the battlefield. It seemed only the master remembered what had happened between them. Seeing the disappointment in his eyes, Rustica started making excuses, saying she was just overwhelmed with various problems. Maybe she had forgotten the details, but she still remembered the blonde-haired boy. That being the case, Hayden hoped she also remembered some of their conversations. The truth was, she hadn't forgotten him. She had forgotten the person she used to be. That time when everything was fine felt so distant, as if it had never happened. For a moment, Rue felt it was the fault of the curse concentrated on her head. In front of Hayden, however, she could be as confident and shameless as she pleased. The important thing was that she remembered everything while he was crying and whining like a baby, for which he should apologize to her. If Rustica kept looking at him like that, the Emperor guaranteed she would remember everything. I mean, he really doesn't have a face that's easy to forget. They had nothing else to do there, so they decided to go back. After all this, Hayden swore he could sneak in and out, but Rue was completely against it. The diplomatic situation was already tense. Because of her, although she didn't think so, the Emperor still felt he should pay Carlos a visit. Considering the Emperor of Kalita had just appeared at the embassy, magic must have been involved. Before Hayden could respond, she wanted to say they shouldn't cause trouble right now. If a war broke out, Rue wouldn't get the chance to do what she wanted. She had been waiting to cut off Carlos's head. That being the case, the master agreed to start the war after most of the curse was lifted. After their talk, Hayden took her to the garden, wanting to give her something. It was like he had eyes in the back of his head. Noticing she had something to say, he told her not to hold back. She felt it was a bit much, but in the end, she decided to ask. She had been dying to know how old Hayden was, but the question made him freeze. It had been 430 years since the child's remains were returned, which was also when they took him. They kidnapped Lord Constant when he was just a child, only 13 years old. When he woke up, he found himself in the laboratory Rustica had discovered behind the Kalita treasury. Then he fell into a deep sleep again, as if time had stopped. When he woke up again, he was standing before the Great Barrier, fully armed like a knight. And so, while he slept, his growth had basically halted and 400 years passed. After 8 seasons had passed, they met for the first time. Hayden was 15 and Rue was 17. That bastard used people like disposable tools, but their ages were not suitable for fighting. Despite this, Rustica couldn't hide her joy at the Lord's survival. He was concerned about what age range of men she liked. He could be older or younger than her. Anyway, Hayden just remembered that once the mourning period was over, it would be the funeral, and he wanted every member of the Jean family to be present. Rustica was now a member of the Imperial family, and as a Jean, she needed to attend. More importantly, the Emperor had just asked her to sit down. He had a gift for her today, something he had made especially for her. You can't wear flashy jewelry at a funeral, but pearls are the perfect choice, and Hayden had enchanted the earrings. They would help break the curse and protect her. Seeing something so beautiful brought a smile and a blush to her face. It turned out the Emperor had the earrings custom-made with the very pearls Rue herself had brought back. It was like his way of repaying the money she had left at the embassy. Hayden was glad she liked the earrings, as she had never owned anything like them before. Now that he knew her tastes, he swore to get her many more. She could be honest with him. He wanted to know everything she liked. Memories of that crazy night came flooding back. Just then, there was another memory to cling to, and the Emperor was glad she was no longer ignoring him. She began to wonder what else he remembered about her. He remembered everything about her, even things Rustica herself might have forgotten. Afterwards, the Emperor decided to end the meeting, promising to see her again soon. Right now, the only thing Rue could hear was her own heart pounding like the wind. On the day of the funeral for the 5 royal family members, even the nobles of the East and West gathered with the citizens. It was rumored that Kalita's regent would attend, but no one knew if it would be the current one or the former. Rumor had it that the Calitans had completely settled in the West. They thought it was vulgar, unlike the people of the East. All they knew was how to swing swords, but now they were going to rule the entire territory. The hall fell silent in an instant. His Majesty, the Emperor of Persida, Hayden Constant, had arrived at the funeral. I never thought the sages would appear at such an occasion. The guardians of the East and West followed behind Hayden. Although the nobles were divided, the sages had always supported him. Soon, the ceremony began. In times of sorrow, there is no greater pain than remembering the good times. The thin thread connecting heaven and earth has been broken, and the 5 children who are gone forever are being sent on their final journey. May they find eternal rest in the eternal world and with God's blessing. Rustica, try to understand what it felt like to lose everyone you knew. After going through hell, you just want to survive on your own. The girl couldn't even imagine how that kind of pain would burn your heart. Just then, at the event, she suddenly heard a familiar voice. Sir Keiko was delighted to see Lady Rustica Falaska again. He had heard the Western expedition went well and wanted to know if everything was all right. Suddenly, Eliza interrupted their conversation, and Rue had to cut short. It turned out the Emperor was eagerly awaiting Miss Jeans. arrival, so she had to politely excuse herself, bowing before she left. During this time, Hayden had been patiently waiting for the woman he had chosen. Rustica walked in, lost in thought, and bang, a silly grin spread across his face, his eyes sparkling. Although this was Miss Jean's first appearance, she was composed thanks to the Emperor. Hayden always said this, but my God, she looked so beautiful, completely stealing the show tonight. Whether quiet or talking, the girl exuded elegance. You know, she was so breathtakingly beautiful that Hayden could barely contain himself. But they had places to be, so he asked her to accompany him. Before she could agree, though, she gave him a look as if something was bothering her. If she felt uncomfortable around him, the Emperor just wished she would say so. He wasn't really ready to hear it, but he swore to do everything in his power to make her comfortable. Rustica wasn't sure if this was the right time to talk about such things, you know, at a funeral. She still couldn't figure out what the Emperor saw in an ordinary person like her. The truth was, Hayden had always dreamed of marrying his first love. Well, he hadn't officially proposed yet and didn't intend to force Miss Jean into anything. But that guy wasn't going to give up no matter what. They had to go. Someone was already waiting. The Guardians of the East and West were already waiting for them, and Ophelia was super happy to see Rue. But the boss, whose attention was entirely on the envoy, was unusually quiet. The way he stared made the young lady feel a bit uneasy. Ophelia almost forgot to introduce the Dragon Lord who had guarded the eastern part of the country for centuries. The Dragon Lord was pleased to meet Miss Jean and told her to call him Melpheus directly. Ophelia remembered all those children. They were weak from the start and were the youngest, so they died as if falling asleep in the lab, passing away peacefully. Melpheus blamed himself for not having enough power to protect them all. All he could do was drag people across the Great Barrier. For 400 years, Rustica remembered that a group of people and knights captured from Kalita were brought here then. She was stunned when she heard the Overlord had sent 100,000 people to that wall. During that time, what the girl knew about those who returned to Kalita was completely different. The members of their army who crossed the barrier turned into magical beasts. They even said they were starting to become like dam monsters. The heroine never thought that they weren't magical beasts, but humans. There was no need to worry here. Carlos could always maintain tight control over his magic and illusions. Hayden thought that was why the barrier was so hard to break. Carlos just wanted to make sure no one could escape the boundaries he had set. Besides, Melpheus knew Miss Jean wanted to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. But Hayden immediately interjected, asking him to spare some time for the person they had dragged in. Speaking of which, the Emperor asked the Dragon Lord to examine Rustica's curse. The curse had become more refined and complex since Melpheus last saw it, and Carlos had become quite adept at using stolen power. This curse was more insidious and cruel than the one placed on the mistress of the tower. Lady Rustica might have realized it, but the Dragon Lord couldn't even touch Ophelia's curse. The coward Carlos had made sure Melpheus couldn't break any curse he created. The heroine was just curious. She never thought the truth would be like this. But things might be different now, so the Dragon Lord risked trying his magic once. He summoned a giant dragon of fire and sent it straight at the lady. When the magical flames hit her, Rue lost her footing and fell right onto Hayden. Melpheus couldn't stop him, and he couldn't even lift the curse, but he damaged it, weakened it, and that's what mattered because the Dragon Lord had become the Empire's last line of defense. Now that they had come this far, Rue believed the cracked curse would eventually shatter. After thanking the Dragon Lord for trying, Miss Jean left the hall. Melpheus then began to wonder what Hayden planned to do with Carlos's heir. The balance of power was now broken, driving them to move forward at all costs. Ophelia suddenly chimed in, saying they needed to speed up the process of lifting the curse on that traitor's child. They had gone to too much trouble to bring her here to let her die now. Hayden was sure that would be a loss for all of them. Anyway, the old man wanted to go back to sleep. With the Emperor around, there was no reason for him to be awake. Although he was an elder dreaming of retirement, Hayden intended to work him to death. He had too much to deal with and might need to awaken the master soon. So the boss told him not to expect a good night's sleep. Meanwhile, out of sight, Eliza was waiting for intelligence on the lady's whereabouts. The problem was they had hidden her so well that it was impossible to get close. No one knew where Rustica was, and even if they did, they wouldn't talk. All they could do was wait, as they were used to it by now. There were rumors that the Empire was trying to turn the funeral into a magical beast slaughtering party. Just then, Eliza decided to find the traitor to carry out the Emperor's orders. But before that, the lady hiding her identity with a hood decided to retreat and blend into the crowd. Back at the palace, everyone was happy to see Rustica, and a hearty breakfast was waiting for her. She couldn't just grab some bread as usual. The master was waiting for her today. After a bow, the girl greeted the Emperor's son, as everyone did. But Hayden didn't care what others did, as long as they didn't break imperial law. Otherwise, he would show her what it truly meant to be an exception forever. During breakfast, she mentioned that she used to be completely immobile, but was now training every day. The curse had just been lifted, and if she overtrained like before, Hayden would go crazy. He really hated the way Rue did things, but she told him to offer his own suggestion. Since Rue needed to train anyway, he proposed they work out together, alone, at night. This made Rustica extremely flustered, and she suggested they eat something first. Hayden was always helpful, but sometimes he needed her too, and he wanted to see her all the time. What she meant by need was completely different from what he was referring to. Miss Jean's meaning was purely formal, while the Emperor's was very personal. The way Hayden threw those words around so casually made it obvious he was a player. Even knowing all this, Rue's heart was still pounding in her chest. Speaking of which, she had taught him something that night, the criteria that come up when choosing a romantic partner. The girl was surprised to hear that he actually met several of her conditions. First, the lady liked charming men, and she had complimented Hayden more than once. The alcohol had made Rue a bit more honest, and she said he was handsome inside and out. She also mentioned that the guy was a good kisser, and she enjoyed making out with him. That guy had saved his first time for someone special, but Rue took it and acted like it was nothing. There was no better way to put it. Regardless, the lady still ignored him. Hayden just hoped she wasn't the type to sleep around casually. The thing is, Rustica had said goodbye to that reckless life, and her answer saved a lot of people. The Emperor hated sharing, especially when it came to people. What he couldn't stand most was sharing his woman with another man. It seemed he was really ready to take out anyone who dared to look sideways at his woman. If the heroine was curious, she could test him anytime. Other than that, Hayden was a rather open and upright person. Then again, in Rustica's book, people who called themselves upright were all pretty weird. That being the case, the master felt he hadn't done a good enough job that night. From the moment they kissed to the moment they bowed their heads together, Rue replayed it over and over, especially when he wrapped his arms around her waist. She kept saying how good it felt. All right, dinner was over. It seemed the Emperor had to get back to his duties. Except, he was already done with his duties and wanted to take their relationship to the next stage. Now that the small talk was over, Hayden wanted to exchange gifts and set a wedding date. Rustica just felt she wasn't good enough to be a perfect, noble lady. So the Emperor couldn't even get mad at her. He wanted to judge her flaws for himself. If he hadn't proven himself enough, he promised to try harder. His gift was a surprise, meant to stop Rue from looking for flaws that didn't even exist. Looking at the piece of jewelry, she was sure it had once belonged to the Emperor of Kalita. Hayden said he had modified the bracelet, and now she had a chance to show it off at the banquet. That guy dreamed of being her partner at the banquet celebrating the conquest of the West. He was pulling out all the stops to prove he was the best candidate in all of Persida. With the Emperor's blessing empowering her and her family, Rustica was cornered. Still, she absolutely refused to accept anything that belonged to that bastard. Hayden told her to trust him, saying he had perfected the bracelet. Knowing Rue had zero patience, the Emperor had no choice but to slow down. The curse was strongest on her hands, as they were the most critical part of her body for casting magic. So our girl had to endure using Carlos's bracelet to lift the curse. Locked inside was not only the power of the Emperor of Kalita, but also Hayden's magic. The magical chains began to disappear piece by piece. Rue, being stubborn as hell, held on, staring at her hands through her tears, unable to believe the curse was fading right before her eyes. This was why Hayden was the one to rescue Miss Jeans this time. He couldn't break all the chains at once, or he would tear her fingers and might even rip her entire hand off. Even if the boss did it perfectly, she would still be in excruciating pain. Just lifting the curse from her finger hurt that much, so Xiao Lu couldn't imagine what her head would feel like. Hayden told her not to endure the pain, but she felt very embarrassed, and she didn't want him to touch her lips, hoping he would use something else. But honestly, Hayden did like seeing the lady without pain, and of course, he also enjoyed spending time with her like this. He was just worried that he had acted too weak back in college. At least there, he had listened to Rustica and remained polite because it made her more comfortable. The Emperor was about to go back and talk to her. Just then, Hayden grabbed her hand and started speaking in a tone as if he had just walked out of a high society gala. He was glad the atmosphere was less awkward and that their business here was done. Now, the heroine had to wear the bracelet and the earrings he gave her every day. To stop the Emperor from talking like a fool again, Rustica was sure he hadn't learned it from her. In the past, she gave a young Hayden bread in exchange for his obedience. She took it upon herself to protect him from danger and also to keep him from gobbling down his food. She also promised to give him more bread and milk the next day. Every night, Hayden prayed to his deceased mother, thinking Rustica was an angel sent by her. Of course, no angel would teach him how to use a sword. Strangely, this girl always praised his solid fundamentals while also giving him both rewards and punishments. But she didn't want Hayden to spend the rest of his life repaying her for her help. Xiao Lu had saved him at a low point in his life, and he intended to repay that kindness by never leaving her side. Suddenly, she felt terrible, and they had to pause their conversation. The Emperor carried her back to her room and reminded her of the upcoming banquet. Although Xiao Lu had never done anything like that, no one was more suitable to be the Emperor's dance partner than her. Weakened, she quickly fell asleep, but Hayden couldn't take his eyes off her. For a long time, she had been open and honest with him about everything. He hoped she was happy in her dreams. That day, while everyone was busy training, Aldwin suddenly decided to take a break. Under the Emperor's orders, he came to see the eternal son of the Kaleda Empire and stood before His Majesty, Carlos. The kid revealed that Rustica was under the protection of the Empire and the Emperor himself, hiding in Shaley Palace. Also, a grand banquet was about to be held, which Miss Rustica was said to be attending. According to Aldwin, Eliza Bakova was already preparing for the banquet, which would be held in a week. Without a doubt, Rustica Jeans would lose her life there. Carlos canceled the mission and decided to deal with Rustica personally. Lady Greta was a lifesaver. Otherwise, it would have been difficult for Xiao Lu to prepare a dress for the banquet. All the satin fabric had been bought up, and the other ladies were sulking because they couldn't get a satin dress. But this was a good thing for Our Lady, as there was a top-tier special fabric reserved just for her to match her pearl accessories. They sewed her a cream-colored dress from pure silk. Her mother used to say that blue fabric was usually used for pledging allegiance. However, Lady Greta was convinced that cream would better accentuate her pure and delicate features. The Countess hadn't even noticed that her daughter had grown up and reached a marriageable age. As it turned out, Xiao Lu's father had frighteningly accurate intuition about such matters. Mom is just trying to say that the Emperor is out of your reach. Throughout their entire tenure, no one has ever seen His Majesty show so much interest in anyone. Everything Rustica wore now was a gift from the Emperor. The heroine had never even considered what she would do if he suddenly confessed. Milan believed her daughter was the kind of girl who could charm someone even if they were blind. It was natural for them to develop feelings, having been childhood friends, but things usually didn't turn out that way. Coming from an enemy nation, they would need to live cautiously for several more generations. No matter what they achieved, they would never get the recognition they deserved. The Emperor's situation was not ideal. He had to marry a suitable woman from the East. Her parents didn't want to force their daughter into a marriage for personal gain, but they hoped Rustica would meet someone who understood and supported her. The bride's parents lacking powerful support would be a weakness. Milan only wanted her daughter to experience happiness and forget her pain and tears. Meanwhile, she herself was in a position where she couldn't even properly hug her own child. Xiao Lu could have married someone of high status for money, but her mother didn't think she was that kind of person. Having earned money through blood and sweat, neither her mother nor her father expected Rustica to bring money home. They just didn't want others to point fingers at their precious daughter. Memories and feelings are important, but sometimes you have to set those things aside for a while. This was just a fling destined to end. The heroine knew this, and she was ready to end their relationship. Then why did it hurt so much inside, as if a scar had been left behind? Now that there was nothing to worry about and Xiao Lu knew everything, she didn't want to be a burden to her family. She hated the thought of losing Hayden, but she couldn't turn her back on the family she had just reunited with. Tears streamed down her face, both in gratitude and as an apology for leaving him behind. Soon, Aldwin reported the Emperor's orders, telling Eliza not to kill Rustica, but simply to monitor her, and not to forget to keep an eye on rumors, as a conspiracy might be brewing in the dirty back alleys. In a bar, some people were gossiping about the Emperor deploying police near the palace. The people here talked about the Emperor as if he were just another dish they had for lunch. If a real man with some class were in power, they wouldn't dare do this. The Emperor of this country, it seems lately, is far from worthy of Eliza. Everyone had noticed that thanks to the Ministry of Labor's hospital, even the children on the streets were well fed. No matter how much the nobles complained, the working class adored the new emperor. Eliza realized that this emperor had reached a point where he would stop at nothing, even caring about the opinions of slum dwellers. On the day of the Count's daughter's debutante ball, he arrived so early that she wasn't even dressed yet. He just wanted to get it over with, and then wait for her like a perfectly happy couple. Rustica then rushed into the room, wanting to get dressed as quickly as possible. But the servants decided to take their time, starting with the petticoat. We decided to match the color of the ribbon on her waist to the color of her eyes. Considering Xiao Lu's dance partner would be the emperor, a voluminous skirt was the most suitable choice. Wearing a cream-colored dress with a green ribbon that highlighted her eyes, Rustica looked stunning. Lady Greta finished faster than Hayden had expected, so he promised to reward her. It was a great honor for him to be the partner of such a beautiful Rustica. Before arriving tonight, the Emperor ordered the girl to wait in another room and enter later. When Emperor Hayden entered the palace, Simon introduced the son of the Empire, and the knights all bowed their heads. Seeing him, Rustica bowed her head in respect, confused. However, the Emperor immediately told her to relax and to use her head. Hayden couldn't resist. Captivated by the girl's beauty, he grabbed her forcefully. They needed to be separated for a while, so the Emperor ordered the guards to protect the lady. Immediately after, he told Simon to prepare a report as soon as possible. It seems that Kaleda Embassy is still digging up dirt on us. Also, we've discovered that Aldwin secretly visited Katad, and Eliza has been snooping around in the back alleys. The demonic bee situation in the north and west is calm. That's normal. If things get tricky, the Emperor threatened, just level the west and the north. Most of Kaleda is useless land anyway, which is why Carlos seized the southern and central regions. As it turned out, every single noble attended the banquet. The Emperor was almost moved by their loyalty. They deserve praise. It is time to introduce the son of the prosperous Persian Empire. His Majesty the Emperor has arrived. Thanks to the Emperor's hard work, they could finally have a proper social season this year. After taking his throne, Hayden genuinely hoped everyone would have a good time. Looking at the joyless faces of the guests, the guy didn't change his mind. The ball began, though they all looked dejected. You would think that at a celebration like this, everyone should be in high spirits. The Emperor had gone all out to eliminate those demonic beasts for the sake of national security, but now he was extremely annoyed because everyone around him seemed so miserable. The Count and Countess were stunned, completely speechless. They owed His Majesty too much. This was much more boring than Hayden had imagined. He had hoped for something more interesting to happen. Simon said there was something that required His Majesty's personal attention. It turned out that Miss Rustica Janus, the one who found the royal remains, had prepared a little something for the boss. A drum roll sounded, and Miss Janus walked into the throne room, carrying a huge tray. For her daughter's sake, Countess Milan prayed that this was just a passing infatuation. The girl was about to bow to the son of the Empire, but Hayden excused her from the formalities. As one might expect, the Emperor, in front of everyone, directly refused to acknowledge the greeting of a nobody family. Simon desperately tried to give him a hint, like, dude, don't be so obvious with the cold shoulder. Miss Rustica has brought a sacred symbol, something that rightfully belongs to your Majesty. It was once thought to be lost forever, but the ladies were dismayed because it wasn't complete. She believed that even some of its fragments could enhance the Emperor's and Persiton's reputation. This was the treasure of Persiton, something Carlos Ingram had stolen from the royal treasury 430 years ago. Their brilliant glow left no one in the room doubting that they were the real thing. Rustica was glad to have recovered these two pieces of regalia symbolizing the emperor's authority, the scepter and the orb. But the other two key imperial symbols, the crown and the sword, were still missing. Even so, finding these two lost imperial symbols was a huge victory. Hayden was being presented with the royal family's most precious treasures. He couldn't just accept them as a matter of course. So he was prepared to grant Miss Jeans any request she had. Rustica didn't want any reward right now, so she only asked the emperor to remember this meeting. Perhaps one day, if she had the chance, she would decide to ask His Majesty for a favor. She wanted the honor of taking Carlos Ingram's head with her own hands. As he expected, the daughter of Count and Countess Ferraz was a true knight. Since this wasn't in the script, Hayden prayed she would take it back. He stated bluntly that it was inappropriate to talk about war with Caleda right now. If the Emperor of Caleda were to put this land in danger, Rustica was prepared to go to the front lines herself. The Countess couldn't believe her daughter had asked the Emperor to cut off Carlos's head. This response alone eased some of the pressure on the Jeans family, who came from Caleda. So Hayden figured they wanted to use his power for something that might not even happen. This was not just Xiao Lu's dream, but the dream of her entire family who had fled Caleda, and she was desperate to achieve it. It wouldn't be called a wish if it were that easy to obtain. But the Emperor promised that if that day came, he would grant Miss Rustica that right. Hayden just couldn't shake the feeling of being overlooked because of that damn Carlos. If it weren't for Xiao Lu's curse, he would have cut his head off on the spot. By killing that bastard Carlos, Hayden dreamed of filling Miss Rustica's entire mind with his own image. When the ball began, everyone was betting on who His Majesty would dance with. Some thought he might just say he wasn't interested in the whole banquet. The ladies, on the other hand, were convinced that after he crushed that wave of demonic beasts, marriage negotiations were a sure thing. With His Majesty's abilities, he couldn't possibly leave the Empress's seat empty forever. But for those of us from the West, it's not really our problem. The smart bet was on a daughter from the Eastern Noble Alliance, the Olmsted Alliance. They coveted the fertile lands and even had their eyes on the throne. Another contender was Katerina Lambert, the daughter of Duke Aranka. She attended the ball with her older brother, Count Elsh, the eldest son of Duke Alice, also known as Manuel Lambert. In the crowd, Katerina suddenly spotted Sven Yvonne, the daughter of Marquis Sven. Miss Lambert wasn't even sure if the Emperor would dance at all tonight. It was said that no one could make a man who fought demonic beasts on the front lines do anything he didn't want to. Besides Katerina, there were over 20 other noble ladies from the Olsen Alliance in the ballroom. That was why her brother wanted her to try harder to get a dance with the Emperor. The lady believed that His Majesty wanted to see the Eastern nobles fight tooth and nail for a spot by his side. The music kept playing, and the Emperor kept waiting for his lady, but Rustica was already late. After telling them her wish, the girl felt she had done her part, but it was only matters of state that kept them from being alone. None of it mattered because Hayden was ready to ask Miss Jeans to dance. Right here and now, just one dance, a gesture of tribute to the person who organized it all. On the dance floor, they became one, their bodies an extension of each other, telling a story of love. Back in Clay, girls like her were only assigned to watch over the ladies who danced like this. It wasn't all bad, as sometimes she wished she could dress up and dance too. But Hayden noticed that even in his arms, she was thinking of someone else. He wanted Miss Jeans to think only of him while they danced, and he immediately remembered her request. For the first time, he realized that Xiao Lu trusted him, and he couldn't believe she needed a public guarantee. She was sharp and knew His Majesty couldn't refuse. Hayden himself wanted to tear that bastard to pieces. He often imagined him suffering, and when it was all over, he said she could take Carlos's head. Without a doubt. But if she could have her way, Xiao Lu would rather be called a noble than just a woman. The Emperor had already promised her something in public, so he wanted something in private in return. But the lady just brushed it off as if it were nothing, even though she completely disagreed. So, if everything went according to plan, the Emperor wanted something in exchange. But first, he wanted to know what Miss Jeans would have wished for if none of this mess had happened. Xiao Lu didn't want anything more than what the Emperor had promised. She dreamed of her family, and Hayden gave her that. Sadly, that wasn't a lie. That was why the guy hated that bastard. Carlos took up so much space in Miss Rustica's mind that there was no room left for Hayden. In fact, there was probably something else, a wish other than revenge. Something so precious that Xiao Lu kept it hidden deep in her heart. Something that could never be spoken of publicly. Soon, the Count was happy just to see his daughter safe and not looking gaunt. Meanwhile, Irene was showing off her talents at a social gathering. Xiao Lu had always wanted to see her parents, and now that her wish had come true, she had nothing else to ask for. However, Ethan was confused as to how a young girl could have no desires. Suddenly, the Count noticed some people he hadn't been this happy to see in a long time. According to one gentleman, today's celebration was a truly joyous occasion for the Janus family. The Count's daughter had accomplished something incredible, so the gentleman wanted to greet her personally. But her father declared that she should rest today. She was truly exhausted. As it turned out, Xiao Lu hadn't brought anything that would enrich the state treasury. After talking to those people, Ethan had a bad taste in his mouth. But then, Viscountess Paynham appeared with her son, Nicholas, and quickly cheered him up. Nicholas Stewart was very polite and warmly welcomed Miss Jeans. The guy seized the opportunity as soon as he saw it and asked her to dance. He was 1,000 times better than the nobles who hinted at marriage alliances and danced for show. Nicholas had only ever read about the royal symbols in history books. Dancing with him was relaxing, unlike with Hayden, where Xiao Lu was always so tense. Such a beautiful lady who had also brought great treasures. The guy watched them, unable to hide his admiration. Hayden decided he needed to find another way to dispose of the demonic beast corpses. Their dance was a mess. Nicholas was not an expert and kept stepping on her feet. It was then she felt that when she danced with Hayden, he had arranged everything perfectly. The dance with the Emperor had been smooth, and any mistakes were because she was nervous. She pushed Hayden out of her mind and decided to focus on the man in front of her. After all, His Majesty was just her employer. The music soon ended, and Miss Jeans was alone once more. She couldn't help but wonder if Hayden was watching her at all. She shouldn't be thinking about him at all. She had promised to forget him, to remember, just as he had said. Her dad brought her fresh orange juice. He would do anything for his daughter. She was tired of thinking that if every man was like Hayden, she would probably die alone. Now was not the time to think about men. Revenge was her main goal. The moment she finally pushed the Emperor out of her mind, bam, she noticed the son of the Emperor again. As expected, he was a heartthrob for all the high society ladies. To be honest, Rustica knew it was impossible for Hayden to have eyes only for her. Her dad distracted her, in a way. It turned out the guy was a master on the dance floor. Count Ethan was good at everything, so his standards for men were ridiculously high. In fact, Xiao Lu had really missed him, and her dad was happy that she was finally home. The Count's daughter was a complete lady now. She looked beautiful, and that dress was stunning. It wasn't until she met the Baron who stepped on her dress that she realized how much people gossiped while dancing. Everyone was worried about their public image, so they used the dance floor for private conversations. The Count had intended to take his daughter home today, but he let her go and appease her younger sisters instead. They were so impressed by Xiao Lu's heroic deeds that now they wanted to become knights too. The little ones would need time, as they were still just children. You know, Ethan remembered Rustica being just like that as a child. She had completely forgotten that she broke her leg at 8, falling off a horse while trying to imitate her mother. It was time to relax, and this place was perfect with plenty of guards. But what she saw made our girl realize that even His Majesty couldn't ignore the Oldsman alliance. Of course, that was exactly why he was dancing with the Duchess of Aranka. She had a lot of influence in the East. Later that evening, Sir Ethan ran into an old friend at the ball. Sir Manuel had heard that the man had suffered quite a bit while dealing with those demonic beasts. Rustica politely introduced herself to Manuel Lambert. Just then, Count Elsha's eyes met the Emperor's, who was staring daggers at them. Manuel figured the lady was done with her greetings and took his leave. Late at night, before leaving, her mother told Rustica to write 3 letters a day. No grand farewell was needed. The girl wouldn't relax until her parents had left anyway. Soon, the carriage started moving, and our girl was lost in her own thoughts. She was fixated on one thing. Hayden was the source of her nightmares and the cause of her constant worries. But suddenly, the carriage screeched to a halt, and Miss Jeans nearly fell flat on her face from a jolt. Just then, she felt a strong grip on her arm and was yanked forward. Powerless to resist, Rustica fell weakly to the ground. But when she finally mustered the strength to look her enemy in the eye, she saw death beckoning to her. The man whose head she had dreamed of cutting off was finally giving her the chance.